Chapter 250. What kind of sound would you make if you were captured by the enemy and put on a laboratory bench for a series of experiments and other torture? Normally, many people would think that this sea beast was just making its last cry as a trapped beast, but that was not the case. Even the locals did not know much about deep-sea sea beasts. Just capturing this one had already cost them a lot of manpower and resources. They had specially built a data system for the sea beast, and the data system was constantly being upgraded and updated, but after fighting for so many years, although the people on the planet had a much better understanding of sea beasts, they still did not have a deep understanding of some key species. Hui Mao pulled back his ears and said to Silin, "Something's not right. This captured sea beast shouldn't be making a sound like this." Silin looked at Hui Mao. Captured sea beasts don't live for long, do they? As far as I know, captured sea beasts will either commit suicide in despair or be used as experimental subjects. Either way, they won't live long, Vino said. Whis shook its whiskers. Judging from its voice, this sea beast doesn't have much longer to live. However, its cry just now wasn't filled with despair or sorrow like you said. It was filled with mockery and joy. Mocking and happy. The others looked at Hui Mao in surprise, waiting for Hui Mao's explanation. Yes, although I can't understand what it is trying to express, I feel that the cry just now was sarcastic, but also contained a sense of happiness. The cry of a sea beast at the end of its life is not a cry of sorrow, but a mocking one. Who is it mocking? The humans on the planet? Dadwa rubbed her chin in thought. York glanced at Kenesenza. Could this be the reason why Coco is feeling uneasy? If it's making such a cry, there must be a reason for it to do so. Kenesenza was deep in thought. She could only predict what would happen next based on her feelings, but she couldn't figure it out. Although she felt uneasy before, she couldn't tell why she felt uneasy. The leaders of the planet's government finally came out. The ruler of this planet was a small aristocrat. Although he was just a small aristocrat, he was quite stubborn and difficult to negotiate with. Sometimes, the lesser nobles were harder to deal with than the greater nobles. It was like the saying, the barefoot is not afraid of the barefoot. We are more than happy to welcome the people of the RAS. The Prime Minister and the minor nobles came out to greet them with smiles on their faces. But looking at their fake smiles, he knew that the so-called welcome actually meant the same thing as, "What are you doing here?" The RAS sent out negotiators, and both sides sat on one side of the conference room. Silin and the others stood off to the side in a daze. There weren't many guards from the planetary government in the conference room. It was obvious that the planetary government knew what they were doing. They couldn't afford to offend the RAS too much. Otherwise, it would be a life-and-death struggle. The two parties had already discussed the matter of sea blue gold before, but at that time, the planetary government's attitude was rather unyielding. However, now that the Royal Academy of Sciences had sent someone over to negotiate with them, they had also shown their sincerity. There was no deal that couldn't be made. The only thing they lacked was a bargaining chip. In order to make the Royal Academy of Sciences relent, the people from the RAS even brought along certificates, contracts, and academician badges. The planetary government was obviously shaken, but they still couldn't give a definite answer. As the owner of the planet, the minor nobles didn't allow the RAS to come into contact with the researchers who invented the aquamarine gold formula. They were probably afraid that the researchers would leave the planet if they were to poach them. However, on the other hand, if the planet could produce an RAS academician, it would undoubtedly be a great boon to the planet. The minor nobles had their own selfish motives. So, although the negotiation was progressing, it was very slow. Silin estimated that the negotiation might take some time. The minor nobles would only relent after they had figured out what the minor nobles wanted. Although the Royal Academy of Sciences was not very welcoming, the minor nobles had arranged for them to live in good conditions. The planetary government was located in the middle of the continental plate, which was also the furthest place from the coast. If the sea beasts could attack here, then the millennium-long struggle would finally come to an end. In the place that the minor nobles had arranged for them, the academicians and scholars of the RAS were discussing countermeasures. At the same time, they were also making academic comments on the situation of the planet. In a room separated by a wall, Sillin and a few other students were discussing. Hey, why don't the minor nobles directly reach an agreement with the RAS? It's obvious that the RAS is more anxious this time. This way, the minor nobles can reap more benefits. For example, they can further arm the land defense system of the city, the country, or even the entire planet. After all, the RAS's weapons research is very good. York leaned on the window sill and crossed his legs. If an external force intervenes, it will be seen as a disguised invasion. After all, once the long-term balance is broken, no one knows what will happen next. Didn't something similar happen on a planet before? Internal strife, external help, and in the end, the external help benefited. The planetary government was reshuffled. Dadwa understood this. That's true. Vino nodded in agreement. The minor nobles are looking at us as if we're looking at a contradiction. We can only make him relent step by step. We can't force him to give in. Is it necessary to go this far just for a formula? Wally yawned and said lazily as he leaned on the table. That depends on who we're dealing with. This formula is crucial to a project of the RAS. Every minute the RAS's research project is delayed is equivalent to losing a lot of money, so we're in a hurry. Don't you see how anxious those old men are? A student beside him said. Dadwa looked at Kenasenza, who had been silent all this time. Kiki, tell us your opinion. Kenasenza shook her head. She was not in the mood to discuss this with everyone. She frowned and said, I have a feeling that something is going to happen. Tell everyone to pay attention today. There might be changes. Dadwa's heart skipped a beat. When Kenasenza said might, it meant that there was an 80% chance that something would happen. After Kenasenza said this, the rest of the people in the room stopped talking and began to adjust their state of mind to prepare for what might happen. Hui Mao, who was lying on the window sunbathing, twitched his nose and opened his eyes. He looked at the end of the street, then looked at the sky and grinned. It's coming. While Hui Mao was feeling happy, he was suddenly dragged into the room by Sillin. What did you find? Sillin asked. Didn't you notice? Hui Mao pointed outside the window. Sillin pulled Hui Mao to the window in confusion. As he breathed, Sillin finally understood what Hui Mao was referring to. The air humidity is increasing. Hui Mao wagged his tail up and down. His dilated pupils showed his excitement. Although it's not obvious right now, I'm sure it's related to those sea beasts. I can already smell the fishy smell of the sea on them. Not long after, there was a commotion around them. After all, they were people who had been fighting against sea beasts for a long time. They reacted quickly to the possibility of the change in the environment. The air humidity display was a must-have for every household on the planet. Children would speculate about certain things based on the fluctuations in the humidity display. It was as common as eating a meal. York turned on his microcomputer and began to hack into the planet's network. Many news were blocked by the planet's government here, and they would not tell the people of the RAS what was happening. Of course, the things that were happening right now were extremely common to the people living on the planet. Since it was common, why would they tell outsiders like them? After hacking into the network, the image that popped up on the microcomputer was shocking. The coastal defense line has been shrouded in thick fog, and the fog is spreading inland at an extremely fast speed. Sea fog. Dadwa looked at the analysis data and moved closer, as if to confirm the authenticity of the data. This data was analyzed by local researchers. They're all professionals, so it's very reliable, York said. Sillin glanced around. Hui Mao was squatting on the windowsill and looking into the distance, shaking its head and humming a little tune. The happier the cat was, the more it proved that those things were getting closer. Some of the buildings around them had already closed the windows and other relatively large openings. The buildings that originally looked like fortresses now looked even more solemn and strict. The people in the buildings had already begun to adjust their weapons. They were prepared whether they would be used or not. Sillin and the others had only seen some short battle scenes. These scenes did not represent the entire battle. The footage was too limited, and many of the sea beasts only showed a little bit of their bodies. "It's fog," Sillin said. The light in the sky had already begun to blur. They could feel the water vapor drifting in the breeze. "Let's close the windows too. There are hallucinogenic factors in the fog." Hearing Sillin's words, two of the academies even took out their detectors suspiciously and checked at the window. It was just as Sillin said. Even if the amount of hallucinogenic factor was not enough to affect them right now, it was hard to say when the fog thickened. Moreover, it would be difficult to remedy the situation once the amount of hallucinogenic factor was reached. Several academicians had already sent people to guard them. They were only separated by a wall, so if anything happened, they would be able to protect them in time. After closing the windows and turning on the airflow balance system, everyone looked at the image that popped up on the microcomputer. Since it could affect the central area, it was obvious that the battle this time was quite large. "We can also see the famous battle between humans and beasts. We can see how strong the manpower and military force of this planet is," a student said. Some people were looking forward to it, some were nervous, but Hui Mao was very unhappy. He was circling around the window. The plan to go out and catch fish was killed. What the fuck? This time, the sea fog had spread over a wider area. From the image sent by the satellite, the entire continent had been covered by a third of the fog, and it was starting from the edge. The fog was very thick, and the fog covered a large area. No one knew how long the fog would last. In the areas with very low visibility, the border guards were already fully armed. If they breathed in such a thick fog without a mask, they would collapse in less than 5 seconds. The fog in the coastal area was already very thick. Ordinary cameras could only capture a blue color. Blue? Yes, blue. If the color was any darker, it would definitely be the same color as the ocean. When they first arrived on this planet, Sillin noticed that the color of the ocean on this planet was different from the other planets. That kind of blue made people feel a little cold. It's not just the sea fog. Some of the islands around the continent and the low-altitude areas near the coast have already been submerged by the sea. York brought up the terrain map. The strange thing is that the ocean is still very calm. Before York could finish his sentence, an image silenced him. This was the image that appeared in the sky above a certain distance from the coastal area. In the background of the spreading blue fog, a rather hazy shadow of a giant beast as tall as a skyscraper suddenly appeared. As it moved, the thorns on its body could be vaguely seen. If not for the fact that the city below was still intact, it would have looked like a giant beast trampling over the city. A projection? Something like a mirage? I'm not sure. Since this shadow has appeared, does it mean that the big guy has already appeared somewhere? York brought up another document and showed it to everyone. What is this? Vino and the others felt dizzy just looking at it. Let's let the academicians of the RAS look at this. But will those stubborn old fellows criticize our intrusion? Sillin pursed his lips. Even if they criticize us verbally, they still agree with York's actions. Otherwise, why would they bring York along? York's network intrusion skills were very strong. This was much more outstanding than his combat strength. Since he was brought along for this mission, there must be a similar intention. However, the old fellows of the RAS were too proud to say it out loud. All right then, I'll send it to them directly. 2 minutes later, an honorary scholar from the Royal Academy of Sciences came in. Seeing the innocent look on York's face, he sighed and said, "Let me tell you something." The academicians all went to study the documents that York sent over. Then, they brought him over to talk to York and the other students about how to, tactfully, guide the network invasion. Although Sillin listened to the speech of the honorary scholar like everyone else, his mind was already thinking about something else. He also asked Hui Mao to hack into the planet's network to dig up some information. The document that York had just found was a research report. The subject of the research was a type of deep-sea giant beast that was called a sea king by the researchers. Every battle was led by these sea kings. From the looks of it, it was quite similar to the black shadow in the fog that they had seen before. From the research report, humans had only caught one sea king in the past 100 years. However, the sea king died not long after it was caught. This research report was published that year. The voice that Scylla and the others heard from the planetary government wasn't the voice of a sea king. It was a species that was even lower in rank than the sea king in the ocean pyramid. The sea king was a deep-sea giant beast with a layer of skin that could exchange ions. They could absorb certain metal elements in the seawater to achieve the purpose of camouflaging these sea monsters. With this layer of functional skin, even if they swam close to the surface of the sea, they would not be discovered by the detectors. As long as they didn't show their heads, most of the time, they could avoid being detected by the scanners. Therefore, for a period of time, humans suffered a lot. Apart from the functional skin that the sea monsters possessed during their evolution, their voices were also very special. The sea king would emit a pulse sound wave to affect or intercept torpedoes or missiles that were fired at it. The special structure in the sea king's throat was like a sound wave converter. It could emit a high-energy pulse sound wave in an instant. It was strong enough to destroy or detonate a torpedo or missile that had been locked onto. The sea king's super-strong directional pulse sound wave caused a lot of trouble for humans. At least, that was the case during the years when this research report was published. According to some of the documents, every time that a sea king came out, some small characters in the shallow waters or the ocean would all escape to make way for the sea king. This was because the powerful sound waves produced by the various sonars created by the sea king could cause the small characters to die. From a certain point of view, the sea king can also emit sound waves similar to infrasound? Vino asked. The honorary scholar nodded. You can say that. Infrasound's ability to cause interference was very strong. It could penetrate and reach very far away. Every time the sea king roared, many cities could hear it. This showed how far it could travel. Just as the honorary scholar was explaining to them, Hui Mao jumped onto Scylla's shoulder. Found it. It really has something to do with the sea blue gold. When he saw the functional skin on the sea king mentioned in the document, Scylla suspected that the sea blue gold formula had something to do with the functional skin of the sea king. Therefore, he asked Hui Mao to hack into the network system to check. The results were just as Scylla expected. However, the research team of the minor noble only obtained a part of the sea king's tail. They are trying to obtain the functional skin on other parts of the sea king. Different parts have different metal ratios. At least for now, the functional skin on the sea king's tail and claws have different metal ratios. In other words, if Scylla and the others could obtain the analysis data of the functional skin on other parts of the sea king, it would be equivalent to obtaining different upgraded versions of the sea blue gold. In that case, why would they still need to negotiate with the minor noble? Scylla. Hui Mao moved his claws and chuckled. Why don't I get some for you? Chapter 251. Are you sure? Scylla asked. Honestly speaking, Whis was the best choice for Scylla to collect the samples. Scylla couldn't leave right now, so it was better for them to collect the samples in secret. Moreover, Guan Feng had told him that strategy was everything in the RAS. There was no such thing as a pure land. Of course, it would be a good idea to ask the fat cat to collect a sample from the sea king. However, Scylla didn't have an accurate estimate of the sea king's strength, and it was still up for debate whether the fat cat could safely obtain a sample from the sea king. Hui Mao was about to explode when he heard Scylla's doubtful question. What can those fish do to me? Scylla thinks for a moment and smiled. Yes, at least his life wouldn't be in danger, even if he couldn't get a sample from the sea king. Scylla almost forgot that the cat wasn't a pure animal. It was a machine. Do what you can. Scylla emphasized. Huimao flicked its ears and replied impatiently, got it. Then, it jumped out of the window Silen had opened. Silen, why are you snoring at a time like this? Dadwa asked in surprise when she saw Huimao jump out of the window. That guy is going out for a walk. It says it's bored here. Let's not talk about it. I'm bored here myself. Wally lay down on the table lazily. Although there was a life support system inside the room to balance things out, perhaps because of the architectural style, they were not used to staying in this kind of environment. It always made them feel stuffy inside. Sea beasts had already landed on the coast, and the battle between the border guards and the sea beasts had already begun. However, they couldn't hear the sound of gunfire because they were too far away. Still, they could tell just how intense the battle was from the blurry images on the internet. Thick blue mist enveloped the city, blocking the sky and some of the surveillance devices. This kind of fog was different from ordinary fog. There were some metal ions and other influencing factors in the fog. They could interfere with the detection system, so they could only know the situation of the area around each scanner. At times like this, the demand for scanning detectors would increase greatly. The people on the planet were already used to fighting in the sea fog. Even if they hadn't developed a transmission detector for this kind of sea fog, they could still quickly respond to the situation on the battlefield. A few people followed the honorary scholar to the room next door where Huang Jia and the Academy of Sciences were staying. Now, only a few people were left in the room that Silen was familiar with. York continued to hack into the various networks on the planet to understand the situation of the battle in the area under his eyes. He showed everyone the images captured by some of the local scanners. Actually, the Royal Academy of Sciences has developed a scanner with a stronger transmission ability. Even this special sea fog should be more useful than the one here. Do you think the people from the Royal Academy of Sciences will provide some equipment to soften up that minor noble? I don't think so. Vino sneered. Let's not talk about whether that minor noble appreciates their help or not. Just look at those old geezers from the Royal Academy of Sciences. Do you really think those old geezers can be compassionate? They can't wait for the war on the planet to get more intense so that the sea beasts can attack faster. That way, the minor noble's government will suffer a setback and come over to ask for reinforcements. That way, both sides will be able to trade faster and the old geezers from the Royal Academy of Sciences will be able to flatter themselves. Indeed. If possible, those old geezers might even give them a hand in the dark. Dadwa agreed. At this rate, how long will this battle last? York asked as he pointed at the images on the screen. In the images, the tremors of the cannons and the roars of the sea beasts were mixed together. It was a strange scene under the blue mist. When the mist dissipates, the sea beasts will naturally return to the sea. That's what I heard from the people outside, Kenasenza, who had just gone out, said. Kenasenza, who had just gone out, said, but I have a feeling that this fog is not normal. What do the locals say? Silen asked. Kenasenza shook her head. They think it's normal. This time, the fog is a little thicker. Almost the entire continent is covered in a layer of mist. The central area is a little better, not as bad as the coastal areas. However, the residents here say that a fog of this scale will appear once every 20 to 30 years, or even once every 70 to 80 years. Every time it appears, the coastal areas will be severely damaged by the sea beasts. The border defense lines will have to be rebuilt after the war. It's a waste of manpower and money. Silen sat in his chair and did not say anything. He had a feeling that something was wrong. The fog was still as thick as ever after 2 days, but the central area of the continent was showing signs of weakening. This was undoubtedly good news for the people of the continent. It also boosted the confidence of the border guards. They would take out as many sea beasts as they could before the fog dispersed and the sea beasts retreated. Now that the situation was like this, many places in the central area had relaxed their guard levels. The place where Silen and the others were staying was very obvious. Although the air vents on the buildings were still turned off, the people inside the buildings were a lot more relaxed than before. Some of the local soldiers would even joke around sometimes, but the people of the RAS were all frowning. For the past 2 days, the minor nobles and the planetary government seemed to have completely forgotten about them. They only sent soldiers to guard the place for protection and surveillance. Now that the battle had calmed down, Scylla and the others felt a little more at ease as well. Their rooms were surrounded by the people from the RAS, so they decided to stay in their rooms and sleep whenever they had nothing to do. They would know what was going on very soon anyway. Scylla brought it into his room, and the images on the microcomputer swiftly changed as his fingers moved. What would York think if he knew that Scylla was hacking into the planetary network with such familiarity? Everyone's jaws would probably drop to the ground in shock, wouldn't they? After all, their understanding of Scylla was limited to the fact that he was Guanfeng's disciple and that he was quite strong. Scylla observed the coastal areas of the continent for a while before hacking into the border guard's internal network and obtaining a report. The report recorded the detailed situation of the defensive battle this time. The sea beasts of all levels were recorded, how many appeared, how many were killed, and the damage to the local cities. However, Scylla fell into deep thought when he saw a red dot on the map. These red dots were the places where the Sea King level sea beasts appeared. According to the report, the Sea King level sea beasts had moved closer to the mainland and destroyed several layers of the border defense line compared to the last time the Sea King level sea beasts appeared on a large scale. I still feel like something's wrong. What is it? Scylla heard the Sea King's roar in one of the videos. Even though it was only an audio transmission, it was enough to make one's heart jump, let alone the border guards who were fighting against the sea beasts. The blue fog blocked the view, so he could only get a general idea of the human side's losses. How many warships and armored tanks were destroyed, how many fighters and aircrafts were lost, that was all. The thick fog blocked the terrible battle scene, and it was only after the fog cleared that it would reveal the fierce battle situation. Scylla tapped his fingers on the table. Scylla was familiar with the coastal defense line, the fortress-like buildings, and the weapons inside. However, logically speaking, the Sea Kings shouldn't have been able to penetrate so deep into the city in just 2 days. Were the Sea Kings really that powerful? Hui Mao jumped into Scylla's room while he was thinking. Judging from its raised tail, things seemed to be going well. Are you full? Scylla asked. Yes. Hui Mao was in a good mood. He squinted his eyes and said. Hui Mao jumped onto the table in front of Scylla and spat out a palm-sized dark blue object. What is this? Scylla looked at Hui Mao. This was Scylla's room. There was only Scylla and Hui Mao here. There was no one else, so Hui Mao didn't beat around the bush. I'm not sure. It should be the functional skin you guys are talking about, right? I took a bite on that big guy. Its skin is quite thick, and the outer layer doesn't have ion exchange properties. That's why I bit a little deeper. See if it's the functional skin, Hui Mao said. Scylla only needed to touch the piece of skin that Hui Mao brought over with his hand to get the information he wanted. It's indeed a functional skin. There is a special exchange layer in the middle, which can absorb metal ions. But is that all you got this time? Hui Mao wagged his tail proudly and opened his mouth to the size of a water tank. He spat out pieces of dark blue skin one after another. Each piece could be used as a mattress. I bit all parts of that guy's body, but I didn't know which piece belongs to which part. You can do it yourself. Did you eat a Sea King beast? Scylla asked suspiciously. Hui Mao smacked his lips and said, I didn't eat one, but it was not Luda's hands. I was afraid that the human army would find it strange if I attacked a Sea King beast on the land, so I went into the sea to catch one. I didn't finish it, so I ate the delicious parts. Those guys were crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. The skin was delicious, but the meat inside was not so good. The burnt skin was better. Celine nodded. As expected, this guy could eat anything, and he even had a stomach whose limits were unknown. Hui Mao spat out several pieces of Sea King beast skin. Scylla also analyzed them one by one. In such a short time, Scylla had gotten a lot of useful data, which might even be more than the data of Sea King beasts in the hands of the nobles. Sea King beasts rarely appeared on the mainland. Few Sea King beasts were caught by human beings. Even if they were caught, they would die by self-destruction. At that time, the samples of Sea King beasts would not be of much value. In contrast, the samples that Huimao gave to Scylla were fresh, and the value of the data was much higher than that of those Sea King beasts that were dying. Suddenly, Scylla noticed that Huimao's face twisted. "What's wrong?" Scylla asked. "No, nothing." Wow, Huimao spat out an egg that was half the size of a human. There was a layer of dark blue keratin on the egg. Compared to normal eggs, the surface of this egg was not smooth. After spitting out the egg, Huimao looked better. He licked his paws and said, "It's nothing. I just ate too much." Scylla, after picking up Huimao and making sure that Huimao was fine, Scylla said, "Don't eat if you can't eat." "Why did you eat so much?" "I can still eat, but these eggs are not easy to digest. I ate too many this time. I'll spit this egg out first. I'll eat it when I'm hungry," Huimao said casually. However, Scylla did not continue to worry about Huimao's appetite. He looked around the egg and put his finger on it to feel the information it contained. "Hey, it's still alive!" Scylla exclaimed. "Of course, I won't eat those rotten eggs." Huimao continued to lick his paws. "In other words, the one you caught was a female." Scylla paused for a moment. "No, they're hermaphrodites." You killed a pregnant Sea King." Wheeze's licking slowed down a little when he mentioned this. "I noticed something when I was dealing with the Sea King." "What is it?" "The eggs were wrapped at the base of the tail. There was a very thick protective layer covering the eggs. However, when I fished out the eggs and ate them, I realized that the size and shape of the eggs were different. Even the genetic material was different. They were completely different species. From the layer of material covering the eggs, they looked similar. However, after biting a few, I realized that they belonged to different species." Huimao transferred the information to Scylla's microcomputer for Scylla to analyze. If the egg was crushed, it would be digested quickly. It was better to keep the egg whole for a longer period of time. Scylla was puzzled as he stared at the information and the genetic data inside the eggs Wheeze had bitten into pieces. It's a Sea King. Why would it steal the eggs of other species? I don't know about that. Wait, Huimao stopped licking his paws. His body trembled. What are you doing? Scylla asked. I crushed another 2 eggs that didn't have time to digest. Scylla. He did not expect that. Huimao transferred the information to Scylla's microcomputer. This time, one of the eggs was related to the Sea King that Huimao killed. However, the other one was not. It belonged to another species. It was different from the 2 species that Huimao had given to Scylla. That's strange. Scylla looked at the microcomputer and pondered. Huimao ignored him. He looked at the egg that was spat out and was about to swallow it. However, Scylla stopped him. Keep this first. Once he finished speaking, Celine took out a big box and put the egg inside. All right. Huimao did not mind. He was not hungry anyway. Eating too much would be a waste of nutrients. He licked his fur and jumped onto Scylla's shoulder to sleep. Sleep after eating. That was the truth. Scylla thinks that after a long time, he still could not figure out what was going on. He stopped thinking about it and started searching for information on the internet. In the process of searching, Scylla sneaked into many research institutes on different planets. Although he obtained a lot of information, most of it could not solve Scylla's doubts. However, when Scylla was sweeping through the network of the coastal war zone, an inconspicuous corner attracted Scylla's attention. That place was also under the attack of the sea beasts. The battle was also very intense. However, in this small corner, there were no scanners, no military communication, no tactical discussions, and no exotic beast roars. Although the battle had stopped a little, it should still be a scene of devastation. It was impossible for the residents to stay there and be in the mood to go online, right? Sillin hacked in to take a look. Because of the war, the conditions there were limited. He could not get the images and audio for the time being. He could only know what the owner of the microcomputer was recording. The documents that popped up made Sillin's eyes light up. They were all about the Sea King beasts, and the analysis was much more thorough than the research groups under the minor nobles. Sillin read through the man's old records and learned that there was a time when sea beasts tried to sneak into the mainland through underground tunnels. Their movements were too loud, and they were discovered very quickly. Digging a tunnel from the ocean was definitely a thankless task, and there were plenty of sea beasts that were killed immediately after they were discovered. That was why the sea beasts no longer attempted such a thing after that. Then there was a document that recorded the changes in the number of Sea King beasts in the past 500 years. It also pointed out the most important point: no Sea King cub was found. In the war between humans and beasts 1,000 years ago, even if the Sea King cub did not follow the humans to attack the land, it would still appear on the sea surface. In the misty area, people had once found a Sea King cub emerging. However, in recent years, no Sea King cub had been found. The minor nobles and his ruling government attributed this to the results of the war. After the war, the sea beasts were greatly weakened. For the Sea King beasts, their birth rate, which was not high to begin with, was even lower. Some of the research groups under the minor nobles even said that the sea beasts had fallen into a dead end. Without the replenishment of new blood, the Sea King beasts would one day become extinct on this planet. At that time, the report received a lot of support, and it also aroused the response of the people of the entire planet. People were very happy and looked forward to the end of the Sea King beasts. However, this person expressed doubts. Although there was no clear evidence, he analyzed many signs, and even analyzed the character of the Sea King beasts. The character of the Sea King beasts? What kind of character did these sea beasts have? At that time, after this person put forward his views, the academic circle of the planet had already opposed it, especially the suppression of the minor nobles' research groups. This person's words would undoubtedly affect the good image that the minor nobles had just created. One could imagine the situation this person was in. If this person was not lucky and always active in the coastal area, he might have been killed long ago. Sillin agreed with this person in a certain aspect. Did the sea beasts not have character? Did the sea beasts not have strict thinking and high intelligence? It was hard to say. Sillin thinks back to the rat extermination mission he participated in at Seven Lights. Those black mice had set up a great conspiracy. Then, what kind of conspiracy did these sea beasts have? Chapter 252. Right now, inside a certain building in the coastal city area, a man with white hair and a thin face was busily working in front of his equipment. He was analyzing every piece of data and running probabilities. It was obvious that this man had gone through rigorous calculations before making any predictions. However, this busy man didn't know that someone in the central continent was watching his calculations and speculations. Every step of his calculations and conclusions was clearly known to the person in front of the central continent's microcomputer. Sillin looked at the map of the main combatants in the coastal city area. Most of the places were where the Sea Kings were. Fortunately, the place where this man was doing statistical analysis had just escaped a disaster, so he wouldn't be in danger for the time being. He wouldn't know if this went on for too long, though. After all, the sea beasts would have to return once the fog cleared, and the damage they'd wreak on the city could be seen from the images of previous battles. Sillin felt that this man would be of great help. Even if some of the data wasn't accurate, the general line of analysis was extremely reliable. At the very least, he was much more trustworthy than the small nobles research group. After thinking for a moment, Sillin sent over 2 copies of the skin data he'd just obtained. Stappen, who was busy with his work, was startled by the 2 data tables that suddenly popped up on his screen. However, his attention was immediately attracted by the two tables, and he immediately deleted the few conclusions he'd reached earlier, like he'd been injected with chicken blood. Then, he substituted the data in the two tables Sillin had sent him and performed a precise analysis. However, Stappen also ran into a problem when he was substituting the new data. He was stuck in deep thought, and Sillin helped him solve the problem. Just like that, two people from different parts of the continent were working together through this network. Sillin had already disguised himself, so even if someone like York who had hacked into the network to steal information, he wouldn't be able to discover that Sillin and Stappen were working together. Right now, Stappen was extremely excited. He'd been fighting and persevering alone for so many years. The rejection, and oppression he'd suffered for the past few decades had left him depressed, but he'd persisted because of the last bit of determination he had for his home. Sillin's help was undoubtedly a shot in the arm that filled Stappen with motivation. On this planet, he was not alone in this battle. Stappen didn't care about the background of this mysterious and unknown person, nor did he care how this person obtained the precise information about these Sea Kings. All he knew was that this information would be a great boost to his analysis. Through Sillin and Stappen's collaborative analysis, they came to a few conclusions. First, it was impossible for a tyrant of the sea like the Sea King to experience reproductive failure. Therefore, it was absolutely wrong to say that the Sea King couldn't reproduce. Second, based on the case studies Stappen had collected and his analysis of the Sea King's living habits, this big guy had both brains and brawn, and wasn't an idiot who only knew how to charge forward blindly. Third, Stappen had come up with a probability graph for the answer. Since they were the kings of the sea, they naturally had to think much further than the other sea beasts. They considered the future of a large race and saw long-term goals. That was why they were qualified to be called kings. Who are you? Stappen keyed in these words on the screen. Right now, they could only converse through text. Stappen's current condition didn't allow him to transmit audio or video at all, and some of the equipment on the battlefield was too damaged. Also, wouldn't it be a lot safer if it was just text? Audio and video were too easy to discover. Sillin stared at the line of words that appeared on the microcomputer's screen. He moved his fingers and typed a few words. Is it important? Stappen also knew that his network had been hacked, but he wasn't angry. Instead, he sent it with the intention of making friends. He was grateful to the person who had lent him a helping hand. Since the other party wasn't willing to reveal anything, Stappen didn't force the issue. He thought that the other party must be afraid of being discovered by that noble. If they were discovered, both of them would suffer greatly, and even their lives would be in question. Under Sillin's cover, Stappen anonymously sent the conclusion of his analysis to the planetary government. However, the planetary government flew into a rage when they saw it. Someone actually dared to make a statement that would destroy the peace of the planet. What impudence! If the public were to learn of the views expressed in this document, there was no telling how much panic it would cause. Therefore, the planetary government suppressed it immediately. Even when they tried to trace the source of this electronic document, they couldn't find anything. The planetary government's reaction was undoubtedly a heavy blow to Stappen. As expected, they still didn't believe him. Since they didn't believe him, Stappen decided to search for the answer himself. He wasn't a person who could think deeply, and he wasn't a person who was good at figuring things out. Therefore, all of his analysis conclusions were based on calculations. According to probability analysis, the conclusion he was looking for was somewhere along the coast. The planetary government doesn't believe me. I'm going to search for the answer. If I don't return, I hope that you can send me this incomplete analysis. This is my final request. Stappen typed this line on the screen. He knew that the other party had the ability to hide. This was also his last hope. After typing this line, Stappen packed up his tools and prepared to search for the answer in the calculated area. Sillin frowned as he stared at the words on the screen. He could imagine that the person on the other side was just as weak as the RAS academicians. People like that would be cannon fodder among cannon fodder if they went to the battlefield. They would either be trampled by sea beasts or blasted to smithereens by indiscriminate cannon fire. How the hell was he supposed to find the answer then? Sometimes, some researchers would always search for the answer hidden in the depths of danger with passion. Even if they were covered in wounds and beyond redemption, they would still charge forward with a single-minded mind. It wasn't for themselves, it wasn't for the ruler, it was for this place they called home. They were as stubborn as an idiot who still held the innocence of a child in the midst of thorns and thorns. In today's world where even the academic world had been polluted, there weren't many idiots like this anymore. From the information stored in Stappen's microbrain, Scylla learned that the so-called new sea blue gold formula wasn't actually invented by the minor noble's subordinates. It was Stappen. Stappen used to be a member of the minor noble's research team, but he was kicked out because he disagreed with the higher-ups. However, there were still people who believed in Stappen's abilities. Otherwise, how could Stappen have obtained other information about the Sea King? This was a trade. Although many people knew that Stappen had been kicked out of the research team a long time ago, the person in charge of the research team had always maintained contact with Stappen. This person didn't have much research ability, but he had a sharp nose for politics, which was why he was able to climb to such a high position. In this world, there would never be a lack of laymen leading professionals. Scylla had met the person who had always maintained secret contact with Stappen before. That person's position was also climbing higher and higher. Scylla had heard that this person's research results were numerous and impressive. Now, it seemed that all of those results were stolen from Stappen. This person had used Stappen's idiotic stubbornness in exchange for his own fame, power, and wealth. Not only did he steal Stappen's research results, he also attacked Stappen's views and suppressed them. And so, one climbed higher and higher, while the other fell further and further. Where are we going? Hui Mao asked when he saw that Scylla had put away the microbrain and was about to go on a long journey. I'm going to find the answer. Don't you want to see what those sea kings are plotting? Hui Mao flicked its tail. It was obviously not in the mood to do so. It had just eaten its fill and wasn't in the mood to do so. That being said, it didn't want to stay here alone to incubate its eggs after seeing that Scylla had left. Scylla left after saying goodbye to the person in charge of the RAS. Guan Feng must have mentioned this to the person in charge before, so the person in charge quickly agreed to Scylla's request. There were others who wanted to leave as well, but they were all turned down without hesitation. This was the difference between different mentors. What Scylla took out was a hoverboard he had borrowed from Guan Feng. The front end of the hoverboard was equipped with a space-braking device that increased the hoverboard's speed by a lot. It wasn't a good idea to fly at this speed through the fog when the scanning equipment wasn't working, but that was only true for other people. Scylla had the best navigation device in the world, the Grey Cat. This cat was much more useful than other devices, and it had all the necessary functions. The fog grew thicker and thicker as they flew from the central region to the coast. Although Scylla could withstand the toxins in the fog, he put on a protective mask so that he wouldn't look like an outsider. Right now, everyone was on guard against sea beasts, so they didn't pay too much attention to humans flying in the sky even if they were detected by the scanning equipment. As they approached the war zone, the security in the sky grew noticeably tighter. Although they were fighting against sea beasts, it wasn't like there were no sea beasts that could fly back. Therefore, they had to keep a tight watch on the sky as well. Hui Mao activated the scanning equipment of the defense forces, but they couldn't detect them. Right now, Scylla was flying toward the close combat zone under the cover of the blue fog. He could hear the roars of sea beasts amidst the sound of cannon fire, but he didn't see a sea king. This wasn't the war zone yet. The sea beasts that were crawling on the residential buildings were killed by the local residents who hadn't evacuated yet. Red and blue blood could be seen everywhere. On the ground, on the buildings, on the bodies of sea beasts and humans, on the fighter jets and armored vehicles. There was red blood of humans and blue blood of sea beasts. Yes, the blood of the sea beasts here was slightly blue. Although there were different shades of blue, blue was the main color. Scylla pulled the hoverboard upward. This wasn't his destination, so there was no need to waste time here. The sea beasts that had been flying happened to be flying towards Scylla. Although they weren't pure flying birds and could only fly at low altitudes for a short period of time, their attack power was not to be underestimated. Scylla cut the sea beast in half with one slash, but the hoverboard didn't slow down at all. As he flew higher, the number of flying sea beasts he encountered was much better. He wouldn't encounter a single one for a long time. After passing through this area, Scylla heard a roar coming from afar. He knew that he had arrived at the war zone. The war zone was much more intense. There were sea beasts everywhere, and there were many large fortress-like buildings equipped with countless cannons and gun barrels. The guards rarely used stimulation-type weapons, but if they did, they had to kill in one shot. Moreover, they had to constantly change their location because the stimulation-type weapons would attract the sea beasts and expose themselves. When Scylla was flying close to the surface, he saw a type of sea beast with a big mouth. They were able to resist the high-voltage electricity released by an armored car, and their thick bony skin was able to resist the cleavers and pincers on the armored car. Moreover, they were smart enough to stick themselves in places where the cannons couldn't reach, and their sharp teeth could leave scratches on the armored car. If an armored car encountered such a sea beast and couldn't escape within a minute, then the armored car would be scrapped, and the people inside would die for sure. The armored vehicle that Scylla encountered was undoubtedly in trouble. Two sea beasts with big mouths blocked the armored vehicle, one in front and one in the back. The sharp teeth in their big mouths scraped off the thick deck layer by layer. As Scylla flew past the armored vehicle, he slashed at the two sea beasts that were blocking the armored vehicle. After he was done, Scylla looked at the blade in his hand and noticed that there wasn't a single trace of blood on it. His blade had sliced through the big-mouthed sea monster's skin and bones, and the cleaver on the armored car looked like a pile of shit compared to it. The longer he used this blade, the more curious Scylla became. How did Esquello get his hands on a blade like this? After the armored vehicle was freed from the obstruction of the sea beasts, it quickly adjusted its cannons so that the sea beasts behind it couldn't find an opening to evade the cannons in a short period of time. The few sea beasts that were running toward them were killed. "I think someone just flew past us," a soldier said. "Fuck, who cares? Just focus on fighting the sea beasts," another person shouted. The closer they got to the Sea Kings, the more large sea beasts Scylla could see. The armored vehicles here were also stronger. It was like a game between giants. The sea beasts didn't even flinch under the continuous bombardment of the giant armored vehicles and flying warships. No one would notice that there was a tiny human flying in the middle of the battlefield. There were a few times when Scylla was almost hit by the indiscriminate bombardment. "Still nothing?" Scylla asked Huimao. "Nope." Huimao shook his head. The reason they were flying close to the ground was so that Huimao could better search for answers. From here onward, they would be in the area with the highest probability of an answer, as Stappen had mentioned. However, the probability of an answer in this area was relatively low. "Forget it then. Let's keep flying." Scylla adjusted the hoverboard and pulled it higher. This area of the battlefield was too intense. It was the most important area of the current timeline, and it was also the area where the Sea Kings resided. The areas closer to the sea were already in ruins after the battle, so it wasn't as intense as this area. However, it was the area with the highest probability of an answer, as Stappen had mentioned. After flying past the most important area of the battlefield, Scylla saw cities that had been trampled by sea beasts and collapsed defensive lines. Of course, something like this would always happen in every major battle, and these defensive lines would be rebuilt after the battle. Huimao twitched his nose. "What is it?" Scylla asked. Right now, they were flying close to the ground. Scylla was responsible for taking care of the sea beasts blocking their way, while Huimao was responsible for scouting. "Eggs." Huimao blinked and chuckled. "It really is the smell of eggs." Chapter 253. Where? Scylla asked. This way. Hui Mao jumped down and ran in a certain direction. Sillin could sense its location, so he wasn't afraid of losing it. Although this area was already in the post-war zone, there were still many sea beasts left. When they saw Sillin and Hui Mao, these sea beasts swarmed towards them. However, they came to an abrupt halt when they were a dozen or so meters away from Hui's. Hui's gave them a very dangerous feeling. These sea beasts weren't stupid, and they were quite wary of Hui's after it tore a pouncing sea beast into pieces in an instant. However, there were still many sea beasts. Some hesitated for a moment before they were ready to pounce. However, Hui Mao's roar stopped them. Hui Mao's roar gave them the feeling of a sea king beast. As for Sillin, because he was very close to Hui Mao, many sea beasts couldn't find a chance to attack Sillin. However, once Sillin was a little further away from Hui Mao, these sea beasts wouldn't hesitate to attack. Hui Mao wandered around the ruins, then pointed at a place and said, "It's here." Underground? Sillin also smelled the smell. Although his sense of smell wasn't as good as Hui Mao's, it was far more sensitive than the average person. In addition, he smelled the smell from the egg that Hui Mao spat out. Now, Sillin could smell a trace of the same smell from here. Hui Mao chose a spot and skillfully started to dig. After digging into the ground, Hui Mao's front claws became mechanized. After stretching out, he dug a hole that was big enough for Sillin to enter. Following behind the gray cat, Sillin took out a disc-shaped instrument and placed it at the entrance of the cave. The disc-shaped instrument expanded with a bang and covered the entire entrance of the cave. It also assimilated itself with the surrounding ruins so that it was hard to tell from the outside that a hole had been dug at the back. Sillin followed behind Hui Mao with a breathing mask. Hui Mao was getting better at digging holes. He was faster than excavator. Hui Mao dug very deep. There was still the smell of the Sea King beast around the hole. It was hard to imagine how the Sea King beast could send these eggs so deep underground. "Ah, there it is!" Hui Mao shouted excitedly. Thousands of meters underground, there was a pile of eggs. Just like the eggs Hui's had eaten earlier, there were all kinds of eggs, and they weren't exclusive to sea beasts. Sillin placed his hand on an egg and examined it. These were all undeveloped eggs. If he broke them, it would only be a pool of sticky egg white and yolk. However, after some time, the little life inside the eggs would develop and break out of the shell. Sillin had a rough idea of the Sea King's plan. What is this place? Border defense. This was the third line of defense in the coastal area. The first two lines of defense were also in ruins. At the moment, there was a battle going on at the fourth line of defense. The coastal areas of this planet did not dig deep into the ground. These eggs of different shapes and sizes were all wrapped in a layer of hard material. Just like the egg that Hui Mao spat out, it could avoid detection. As long as the scanning device did not go within 50 meters of this place, it would be difficult to detect. The metal composition that Sillin analyzed from the skin samples provided by Hui Mao was inferior to the composition of the various components on the eggs. In other words, the dark blue layer of keratin-like attachment on the eggs had a better composition. However, on the other hand, the attachment on the eggs could not continue to carry out ion exchange. You can't have it both ways. This was why the composition on the Sea King's body was not as perfect as the composition on the eggs. Sillin turned around and saw Hui Mao swallowing the eggs one after another. "Didn't you eat too much?" "A little, but I've digested a little." "It's fine to eat this little bit. These are not as hard to digest as the egg," Hui Mao said while swallowing the eggs. "That egg is hard to digest?" Sillin thinks. He thought about the eggs that Hui Mao spat out in the room. Some of the eggs here looked similar to that egg. However, when Sillin put his finger on these eggs, he knew that even though the outer layer was wrapped in the same attachment, the shell itself was very different. Just like the egg that Hui Mao spat out, there were only a few eggs in this large pile, no more than 10 in number. Half of the genes of those hard-to-digest eggs are the same as the Sea King, but I don't know the other half, Hui Mao said while swallowing the eggs. Sillin nodded and put these eggs into the ring with curly leaf patterns. Other than their research value, they could also be used as food for Huimao. However, if these eggs accidentally hatched a small sea monster in the subspace, there would be no other way. There could not be creatures with strong life signals inside. If it was in the form of an egg, it would be fine, but if it was a sea monster, it would cause the subspace to lose stability and collapse. I almost forgot that you have that thing, hee. When Huimao saw that Sillin had put away all the eggs, he smiled happily. This way, he didn't have to force himself to swallow the eggs. After cleaning up the place, Sillin said, "Let's go, to the next place." "Is there more?" Huimao's eyes lit up. These were all food. The more, the better. There should be. Since the Sea King had hidden sea monster eggs under the third line of defense, there should be at the first and second lines of defense, right? After leaving the cave, Sillin and Huimao went to the second line of defense in this direction. Just as Sillin expected, the second line of defense was also flattened into ruins. It seemed that this was done to cover up the eggs underground and clear all the obstacles around it. Sillin did not smell the eggs here, but he could use the third line of defense as a reference. Sillin and Huimao went deeper into the second line of defense. After searching for a while, they finally found the eggs hidden there. Strangely, there was no egg similar to the one Huimao spat out. Celine inspected some of the eggs. From the looks of it, these eggs had been hidden away during the Great War between humans and beasts decades ago. However, the sea beasts inside had gradually matured. It was just that they still needed some time to fully mature. He believed that these little sea beasts would break out of the soil and join the battle during the next Great War. After the beast tied, the second line of defense would be rebuilt, and those eggs would be directly below the line of defense. When the next beast tide came, these eggs would hatch, and they would be able to cooperate with the sea beasts that came out of the sea. But why hadn't there been any young Sea King beasts after all these years? Logically speaking, these hatched little sea monsters would join the battle. But why hadn't they heard of any young Sea King beasts? If the young Sea King beasts were protected in the deep sea, it would be reasonable. But these were all Sea King beasts that had participated in the battle. Could it be that not everyone had seen a young Sea King beast? When Sillin and Huimao arrived at the first line of defense, they knew the answer to this question. The first line of defense was quickly broken in the war between humans and beasts. It was incredibly fast. The heroes of breaking the first line of defense were the hatched little sea monsters hiding underground. It didn't take Sillin and Whis long to find the place where the egg was hidden. Whis had smelled the scent of an egg breaking, and some sea beasts had crawled out of the hole and disappeared into the sea. They didn't head inland. "Ah, there are a few that haven't hatched yet." Huimao walked around the eggs. A little sea monster that had just broken its shell was swallowed by Huimao. After swallowing it, it complained about the taste and spat a few times. As soon as Huimao's voice fell, an egg made a cracking sound. Looking at the little sea monster that had just broken its shell, Sillin had a strange feeling. After this little guy came out, it had a fierce look. The small spikes on its back were all erect. Its four limbs were webbed, but they also had sharp claws. Its body was dark blue, and its surface was hard to protect. Its big mouth was full of sharp teeth. After seeing Sillin and Huimao, it didn't rush towards them immediately. Instead, it opened its mouth and shouted. This voice, Sea King Beast. Although it sounded young, it was indeed the sound of a Sea King Beast. How could a young Sea King Beast be so different from an adult one? If it was mixed with other sea monsters, it would be really hard to distinguish it. No wonder those people couldn't find a young Sea King Beast. As the young Sea King Beast shouted, a few eggs next to it that hadn't moved before made a cracking sound, and then they all broke their shells together. There were big-mouthed sea monsters, and some other sea monsters that Sillin had seen when he came over. These newly hatched sea monsters all rushed towards Sillin and Huimao. However, after all, they were young sea monsters, and there weren't many of them. Most of them had already left, and these little ones didn't have much attack power. Soon, they were killed by Sillin and Hui Mao. That young Sea King beast was swallowed by Hui Mao. After swallowing it, Hui Mao squatted there and didn't move. No one knew what he was thinking. "What's wrong?" Sillin asked. Hui Mao flicked his tail. "This little guy has all the genes of a Sea King beast. It's different from the egg I spat out before. However, I feel that my protruding egg is more difficult to digest." Sillin pondered, but now was not the time to think about it. "Let's go. We'll talk about these things later. The fog is about to disperse. Let's not run into a group of sea monsters. Let's go back to the sea." Sillin and Hui Mao avoided a large number of sea monsters when they flew inland. When they returned to the residence of the RAS, the place was already under martial law. All the windows of the buildings had been opened, and they were no longer tightly shut. Several people from the RAS were discussing how to continue negotiating with the minor nobles. They were discussing whether to take tough measures. However, because tough measures would damage the reputation of the RAS, they didn't want to take such measures until the last moment. After all, the RAS still maintained a good image. When Sillin came back, he didn't communicate with the others. He went straight into his room and didn't come out, saying that he wanted to rest. After entering the room, Hui Mao made an analysis of the little Sea King beast he swallowed. From the analysis, Sillin found that there was a hollow cartilage on the tail of the Sea King beast. The cartilage was usually flat and curled, but when stretched, its length was dozens of times longer than the overall height of the Sea King beast. Although it was cartilage, it was speculated that the adult Sea King beast could harden the cartilage in a short time. The hardened cartilage penetrated deep into the ground, and then sent the egg into a deep hole. The appendages wrapped around the various sea beast eggs belonged to the Sea King beast. Those sea beast eggs hidden underground, even if the form inside the egg had been fully formed, would be in a state of hibernation before the attack of the sea beasts. When the sea beasts attacked, the Sea King beast's cry would wake them up from their hibernation. After hatching, the baby Sea King beast would not immediately come out of the ground. They would feed on other sea beast eggs until the adult Sea King beast called them. Only then would these little guys break out of the ground with other hatched sea beasts. Therefore, the adult Sea King beast would estimate the time it would take for the eggs to grow, and use that time to attack the land. The sea beasts that lived at the top of the food chain, especially the oviparous ones, were all within the Sea King's consideration. The Sea King beast would select a portion of its eggs, then wrap each egg with a layer of appendages, and secretly hide these eggs underground when it attacked the land. The first time the Sea King beast did this, no one noticed it, so it did the same thing the next 2 times. The first line of defense was broken, and the Sea King beast had tasted the sweetness of victory. However, if it wasn't for Sillin discovering the hidden eggs this time, the humans on the planet would have suffered a lot in the next few decades. Sillin had only dug out the eggs in one direction, and there were still eggs buried under the other lines of defense on the continent. However, Sillin didn't have the time to dig them all out. Sillin searched for Stappen through the internet again. Stappen's location had changed. He had probably found some information this time, and was continuing to analyze it. Stappen's analysis narrowed down the search area by a lot, and Sillin discovered that the 3 places where the eggs were hidden were all within Stappen's boundaries. It wasn't just a single place, it was an analysis of the entire continent. It was hard to imagine that a person could come up with a result just based on data alone. If it wasn't for Stappen's analysis, Sillin wouldn't have been able to find these places so quickly. Sillin didn't tell Stappen the answer he had found. Now wasn't the time to talk about this. After a brief conversation with Stappen, Sillin contacted Guan Feng and told him about his findings. Guan Feng would discuss the rest of the details with the people of the RAS. After all, they didn't think that Sillin was qualified to speak to the academicians directly. In the following days, the people of the RAS didn't bother with the minor noble and his planetary government. After the RAS's reinforcements arrived, they started cleaning up the other places where the sea beast eggs were hidden. You've done a great service this time, Silen. You've made me proud. Guan Feng was smiling so happily that his fox eyes were narrowed into slits. Guan Feng didn't think that Silen would not only find a better mixture of sea blue gold, but also eliminate the huge hidden danger there. Those old geezers didn't make any progress no matter how much they tried, but Silen managed to get his hands on a couple of recipes without a word. This also made Guan Feng feel better. Not bad, you're worthy of praise. Guan Feng looked like he was in a pretty good mood. Guan Feng might have a lot of say in the RAS, but he wasn't the only one. Now that Silen had gotten his hands on the other recipes for sea blue gold, Guan Feng's influence had grown as well. The Abyss project team owed Guan Feng a huge favor. Of course, they would stand on Guan Feng's side when it came to important decisions. You'll get your reward. Just tell me if you need anything. Just tell me if you have any other requests, Guan Feng said. Can I ask for anything? Silen asked. Yes, as long as it's within my capabilities. If that's the case. I heard that even an academician of your rank has the right to recommend someone to become an honorary scholar. Guan Feng raised an eyebrow. That's right. Do you want to join? Not really. I want to recommend someone. Silen told Guan Feng about Stappen. Guan Feng waved his hand and gave his approval. I'll let your team leader know. Come back with me when you find Stappen. I'll take care of the rest. All right. With Guan Feng around, Silen didn't have to do too many troublesome things. After receiving Guan Feng's promise, Silen contacted Stappen through the network. Although the fact that the RAS had found sea beast eggs near the border hadn't spread, Stappen must have heard about it from the minor noble research groups. Right now, Stappen really wanted to meet Silen and share his joy with him. This incident had proven his point of view to be correct. Although the public didn't agree with him, Stappen was happy to have a supporter. When Silen saw Stappen, the latter looked like he was in dire straits. Although Stappen had done his best to tidy himself up, his broken leg and white hair only made him look even more dispirited. It was obvious that Stappen's broken leg had only recently been severed. Right now, he was only supported by a simple mechanical leg. Stappen couldn't afford any treatment at his current dire condition. Stappen was also surprised to see Silen. He didn't think that he would meet such a young person. In Stappen's imagination, this person who could discuss and analyze data with him should be a middle-aged researcher at the very least, right? But the reality was that he was a young man in his early 20s. The duo found a quiet place to talk. Silen didn't want anyone to hear their conversation, but it didn't matter if they did. It wouldn't change the outcome. After talking about the Sea King for a while, Silen explained the purpose of his visit. Honorary scholar. Stappen couldn't help but exclaim loudly when he heard Silen's words. Who wouldn't want to go to the highest temple of academic researchers? Even in their dreams. It was Stappen's dream when he was young, but he had suppressed it after experiencing so many things. It was an extravagant hope that could never be achieved. But now, Silen was saying that he could give him such a chance. How could Stappen not be excited? Stappen didn't lack ability to live to this day. The only thing he lacked was an opportunity. However, the god of luck never seemed to like him. He was always suppressed and abandoned step by step. Every time Stappen lay exhausted in his simple and crude workshop, he would always think that if he was given a chance, even if it was just a small chance, he would definitely prove himself. He would prove that he was right, that what he was doing was the right thing. The minor noble didn't give him this chance. The research organization didn't give him this chance. But Silen did. The minor noble would definitely be quite unwilling to bring Stappen to the RAS after learning the truth. But could the minor noble not let him go? Did he dare not? He didn't dare. The RAS wanted him, and Stappen himself had agreed to it. A minor noble like him didn't have any bargaining chips in his hands right now. He couldn't shake the RAS at all. Not only did the minor noble not make things difficult for Stappen after he realized this, he even smiled at him. After all, he came from this planet, from his fief. This was his home. He would still rely on Stappen's analysis and support for the war against the sea beasts in the future. After everything was taken care of, everyone prepared to return to the capital Star region. However, the day before they were about to leave, 2 academicians were kidnapped while they were out scouting. Of the guards who protected them, 3 were killed, and 10 were injured. 2 of them, who were transferred from the affiliated schools like Silen, were heavily injured. The people of the RAS were furious, and the minor noble couldn't sleep at all. Kidnapping someone from the RAS on his own turf. It was going to be hard for him to get out of this mess. He had just finished the war against the sea beasts, only to run into this mess again. The minor noble was about to lose all his hair. The naval equipment on the planet was pretty good, but the equipment in other areas wasn't. There was no surveillance footage, so it was obvious that the kidnappers had come prepared. Moreover, they weren't residents of this planet. The person who could injure the guards without making a sound couldn't be weak either. Their plan was very thorough. Not long after the 2 academicians went missing, they received a message. Who would have thought that the kidnappers were after the sea blue gold? Normally, the best sea blue gold recipe wasn't made public, and the ones that were made public weren't the best ones. However, the RAS had obtained more than one recipe this time, and all of them were very high level. It would probably take at least 3 to 5 years for them to be made public. Not to mention that there was a super recipe that was known as the perfect sea blue gold. Sea blue gold had a wide range of uses, and different ratios had different functions. The fact that Guanfeng needed sea blue gold to develop the Purgatory Thunder Snake S proved how valuable it was. Every high-level sea blue gold recipe would sell for an astronomical price on the black market. It wasn't strange that someone was after it. What was strange was that the kidnappers had gone against the RAS directly. Was it the work of a certain noble, or the rioters? For now, there was no conclusion. The planet was quickly locked down after the 2 academicians went missing. Even the surrounding planets were mobilized to guard the place. The Mist Bodhisattva royal family also sent people to investigate. There weren't many people who knew about the true sea blue gold recipe. When Silen gave the recipe to Guanfeng, the latter must have communicated with a few important people in the RAS. Therefore, the only people who knew about the recipe were Silen, Guanfeng, the project manager of the Abyss, and a few leaders of the RAS. Everyone else, including the 2 kidnapped academicians, didn't know about it. However, the 2 of them were important figures in the Abyss project, so they couldn't be ignored. The RAS was doing their best to find them. The Mist Bodhisattva Emperor had decreed that the sea blue gold recipe must not be leaked. There were a lot of rioters in the Empire. If they learned about the latest sea blue gold recipe, it would undoubtedly bring a lot of trouble to the Empire. Although some things weren't stated openly, Silen could guess a few things. After all, the Empire spanned more than 20 star regions. How could it possibly be a united front? The poisonous insects hiding in the shadows would come out and wreak havoc whenever they had the chance. Guanfeng wouldn't tell anyone who knew the recipe, and the person in charge of the Abyss project was backed by the royal family. That being said, Silen was a different story since he was a native of the imperial capital. The RAS didn't dare do anything to Guanfeng because he was his backer. All they could do was guard him closely. Silen was trapped inside a building like he was in a prison cell. To put it nicely, he was being protected. Right now, it was rumored that Silen had leaked information about the sea blue gold recipe. There were a lot of people who disliked Silen, and a lot of people who were jealous of him. There were definitely a lot of people who wanted to smear Silen's name. Although a lot of people didn't believe it, the rumor didn't change the fact that Silen was under heavy surveillance. There were even more people who disliked Guanfeng. However, although Silen was Guanfeng's student and Silen was rumored to have leaked the recipe, no one dared to say that Guanfeng had anything to do with it. Those who did were killed in secret. Who was Guanfeng? He was the emperor's tutor, and even the current mist Bodhisattva emperor would defend him. Why would someone as experienced as Guanfeng do something so stupid? Therefore, anyone who wronged Guanfeng was seen as malicious slander, and slandering the emperor's tutor no less. Therefore, those who wanted to but didn't dare to smear Guanfeng's name directly targeted Sillin. The rumors against Sillin grew more and more numerous. In order to prevent the kidnappers from escaping, no one was allowed to leave the area. Therefore, the reinforcements didn't leave to prevent the kidnappers from escaping. If anyone tried to leave by force, they would definitely be attacked as kidnappers. Therefore, Guanfeng's original plan to send Sillin back to the capital was rejected by the higher-ups just to be safe. Now, Sillin could only be guarded by layers of guards in a room that was 100 square meters in size. He wanted nothing more than to eat, drink, and go to the bathroom. Sillin wasn't allowed to touch the internet, and his communicator was confiscated. Hui Mao and Sillin were locked up together. It couldn't let Sillin eat the eggs even if someone was watching over it. All day long, it lay in Sillin's arms, waiting to be pacified. Although Guanfeng couldn't revoke Sillin's guardianship order, he did a lot of work. One day, Sillin woke up and saw his senior brother, Pastura, and senior sister, Fu Qingqing. Pastura's presence meant that the imperial guards sent to assist in the investigation would show him some respect. Fu Qingqing's presence meant that the imperial guards sent to assist in the investigation would be more careful as well. As for Goryo, Pastura said that the kid was still on his way here. Everyone Sillin came into contact with was under surveillance, not even Pastura or Fu Qingqing. That being said, they could achieve their goal even if they didn't say a word. After all, they were here to hold the fort. Guanfeng couldn't come. He was one of the few insiders, so he stayed at the RAS with a few others. That was why he sent Pastura, Fu Qingqing, and Goryo to back up Sillin. His disciple wasn't someone anyone could bully. Even if he was confined to 100 square meters or so, the person in charge of the guards had to treat him with respect. Sillin was very grateful for Guanfeng's help, but there was another person besides Guanfeng who had come over. Zhen Xingqian and his men showed up the second day after Pastura and Fu Qingqing arrived. It looked like they were here to back up Sillin as well. Chapter 254. A lot of people could understand why Pastura, Fu Qingqing and the others had come over. They were brothers and disciples of Guanfeng after all. But why did the Zhen family come over? Zhen Xingqian was the next successor to King Fuji's throne. Right now, Zhen Xingqian's every action represented the entire Zhen family, and the current King Fuji was slowly ceding power to Sillin. Therefore, Zhen Xingqian's arrival silenced a lot of people while they were still gossiping about Guanfeng and Sillin's wrongdoings and making wild guesses about Sillin and Guanfeng. They could talk about the royal family in their hearts, but they couldn't say it out loud. At the same time, many people's attention had shifted from the sea blue gold leak to Sillin. The previous King Fuji, Zhen Xingqian's grandfather, Zhen Liao, wasn't a good-tempered man. It was an open secret among the upper echelons that Zhen Liao and Guanfeng didn't share a good relationship. Many people knew that Zhen Xingyao, Zhen Xingming and the others had suffered a lot at Guanfeng's hands when they were still in the affiliated schools. Guanfeng would more or less feed them more or less. After all, Guanfeng's influence in the affiliated schools was pretty big, and his identity as a royal prince wasn't going to give Zhen Xingming and the others any advantage. It seemed that no one with the word Zhen in their name or anyone with a Zhen family tag in their name had ever fared well in Guanfeng's hands. Among the students Guanfeng had personally taught over the years, the Zhen family was the only one that didn't have a student of Guanfeng's. Moreover, Guanfeng wouldn't show up where Zhen Liao was, and Zhen Liao wouldn't go where Guanfeng was. Even if the two of them had to go together, they would treat each other like complete strangers. There was no sense of politeness between them at all. It was as if looking at each other for an extra moment would hurt their eyes. Who would have thought that both sides would show up for a greenhorn like Sillin at the same time? It was good enough that the Zhen family didn't slander Sillin after what happened to Guanfeng's student. Why would they show up to support Sillin? Unfortunately, he was here to hold the fort. The Imperial Guard and the Joint Garrison Army's eyeballs nearly popped out of their sockets when they saw Zhen Xingqian talking to Sillin in a friendly manner. Zhen Xingyao and Zhen Xingming didn't come with them this time. Zhen Xingqian was the only one who came with the Zhen family. Inside the room, Sillin, Pastura, Fu Qingqing, Goryo, and Zhen Xingqian were sitting around a table. Zhen Xingqian didn't make things difficult for Pastura and the others. His attitude was neither warm nor cold, but he was smiling at Sillin. Through his conversation with them, Sillin learned the reason why they were guarded so strictly. At first, they thought that sea blue gold wouldn't be too important even if it was an upgrade recipe, but things seemed to have escalated when Sillin handed over the latest recipes. Moreover, the higher-ups were definitely hiding something important from them. Pastura and the others' expressions told them that they must know something, but they weren't allowed to talk about it carelessly. After all, they were under surveillance right now. Their conversation would be monitored, so Zhen Xingqian didn't reveal his secrets to Sillin. However, he did drop a bomb on him. After this is over, my grandfather wants to see you. He originally wanted to come over immediately, but the current situation is a little complicated, so he can only wait for this matter to pass. Everyone's first reaction was, bullshit. Their second reaction was, how is that possible? Their third reaction was, Sillin is a member of the Zhen family. Pastura shot Sillin a glance. He was sure that Guan Feng knew about Sillin's background, and there was no way he would accept a student who was related to the Zhen family. He didn't know the truth, but he believed that his teacher must have his reasons. Zhen Xingqian's words weren't just for Sillin. They were for the other eavesdroppers as well. How dare you not treat someone the previous King Fuji wants to protect? Goryo and Fu Qingqing exchanged a glance with each other. It looks like Sillin wouldn't have suffered any grievances even if they hadn't shown up. Our little junior brother sure hid his strength well. The previous King Fuji's visit to Sillin was within Sillin's expectations. He already had this speculation after meeting Zhen Xingqian. Is this finally going to end after so many years? After the group left, Sillin went back to his bedroom and leaned against a chair to read a book. Hui Mao crouched on top of the egg he had spat out earlier. He had been very bored lately, but he didn't have much of an appetite. The eggs he had eaten a few days ago were enough to last him for a while. However, he was annoyed at being locked up in a crappy place like this, so Sillin tossed the egg to Hui Mao to play with. He could eat it if he got tired of playing with it. The surface of the egg wasn't smooth, so Hui Mao was able to scratch himself on it. That was why the egg had become Hui Mao's favorite pastime. Every time he saw Hui Mao dozing off on top of the egg, Sillin felt like he was a cat sitting on top of an egg, even though the ratio between the two was very different right now. Since there were a lot of people supporting him, Sillin had fewer restrictions on his movements inside the building. However, the outer layer of the building was still heavily guarded. Sillin had a feeling that this lineup wasn't just because they were afraid that Sillin would leak the recipe. It was more like they were guarding Sillin himself. Was he being watched by someone? Sillin had always trusted his instincts. He had a feeling that there was a pair of eyes watching him from the shadows, waiting to strike when he was caught off guard. This person must have something to do with the decision made by the higher-ups and the information Pastura and the others couldn't reveal. Sillin didn't understand why he was being targeted by someone. He might be Guan Feng's student, but he shouldn't have the right to receive such treatment, should he? That was why Sillin asked his question when Goryo came to visit him the next day, am I being watched by someone? Goryo was surprised by Sillin's question for a moment before smiling helplessly. I knew I couldn't hide it from you. He let out a long sigh before asking, you're the one who discovered it, aren't you? Sillin knew that Goryo was referring to the sea blue gold recipes, so he nodded. That's right. Even if I can't get my hands on it, it's still possible to get you there. Sillin frowned. Wasn't this a little too arrogant? Wasn't this openly opposing the Empire? Not to mention opposing the RAS. No, there were people who didn't care about opposing the nobles and the RAS. Not every new technology was under the control of the RAS. There were always people who didn't want to join the RAS or work for the nobles. Instead, they formed their own organization and scattered themselves all over the empire. They were also the biggest headache the empire had been unable to clean out for a very long time: Black Viper. Black Viper was the biggest dark force in the empire. It had existed for a very long time, and every mist bodhisattva emperor would do his best to clean out Black Viper's organizations, but to little avail. Every time Black Viper's forces were wiped out on a large scale, some nobles would always be dragged into the mix. That was the biggest headache. They obeyed the orders of the nobles, but some of them were willing to fall into their trap. The people of Black Viper were always unscrupulous. They could turn a prosperous planet into a dead one, sell drugs or bacteria that the empire strictly prohibited, and they would never be caught. Scylla hadn't fought against Black Viper before, but his 3 senior brothers and sisters had. That was why Pastura and the other 2 weren't just here to support Scylla. They were here to protect Scylla as well. After all, it was better to trust one's own people more. Goryo glanced at Scylla's expression and guessed that the young man understood what he was going to say. He patted Scylla's shoulder and said, "Don't worry, we're all here." Scylla rolled his eyes at him. "I'm not afraid. Wait for 5 more days. If we can't find those people by then, we'll take you back to the imperial capital." Before leaving, Goryo shot a glance at Huimao, who was sleeping on top of the egg with its eyes closed. He asked Scylla, "Is the cat hatching the egg?" "Yeah." Goryo imagined Huimao hatching the egg and eating the newborn sea beast. It was strange no matter how he thought about it. Felines were indeed eccentric. While sending Goryo off, Scylla suddenly looked outside the window as if he sensed something. "What are you looking at?" Goryo followed Scylla's line of sight and saw only a few buildings that looked the same. They weren't very tall, and there was nothing out of the ordinary about them. "Nothing, just looking at the scenery outside. It's been a long time since I last went out." "You brat. It hasn't even been 10 days. Back then, Teacher Guan held a gun to my head and forced me to reflect on my mistakes for more than 20 days. You're already doing a good job." Goryo punched him with a smile. "Just wait a little longer, I'm almost there." After Goryo left, Scylla shot another glance in that direction before moving his gaze away. He flicked Huimao's ear and said, "Let's go. We're going to sleep in the room." Huimao opened his eyes. He didn't look sleepy or lazy at all. Instead, he looked like he was suppressing some kind of excitement. He kicked the egg off the table with his paw, jumped off the table, and rolled the egg toward the resting room. Fortunately, the egg was very sturdy. A normal egg would have turned into a mess after 2 or 3 kicks. Every time Scylla saw Whis abuse the egg, he would wonder if the final egg really hatched a sea beast. Would the sea beast suffer from congenital concussion? A pair of eyes suddenly appeared on the roof of a residential building not far from the one Scylla was staying in. Its back was facing Scylla. Another 4 days passed after Goryo spoke to Scylla. The investigation hadn't made any progress during this time, and it was as if the 2 kidnapped scholars had vanished into thin air. "It's tomorrow, isn't it?" Huimao crouched on the egg and asked Scylla. "Yeah." Scylla looked out the window. Huimao wagged his tail and muttered, "Why isn't it showing up yet, soon?" Pastura and the others were sitting in the building next door, but the atmosphere was very serious. The closer it was to the deadline, the more vigilant they needed to be. This was the experience they'd gained after coming into contact with Black Viper. In front of the 3 of them was a surveillance feed of Scylla's room. Even Scylla's room was being monitored. On the feed, Scylla was talking to Huimao and scratching Huimao's chin. Zhen Xingqian's room wasn't too far away from Scylla's building. He was sitting on a chair and going through some documents. Even though he wasn't in the imperial capital or the Zhen family's headquarters, there were still some things he needed to take care of. This was what the would-be king of Fuji had to do, and it was called government affairs. "Your Highness, Ha Turiai is here." A subordinate came in to report. Ha Turiai was one of Zhen Xingqian's subordinates. Jen Xingqian had ordered him and a few others to investigate Black Viper. Ha Turi must have returned for something important. Let him in. Jen Xingqian didn't even look up from the document in his hand. After Ha Turi came in, the tall, muscular man saluted Jen Xingqian respectfully and said, "Your Highness, there's news." Due to Jen Xingqian's identity, this building and its surroundings were all Jen family members. The other guards wouldn't set foot in this area. Jen Xingqian walked out of the building with Ha Turi and a few other servants behind him. He signaled the Jen family guards to stay put and go to Silen's room. Since the deadline was approaching, the security around Silen's building had tightened. When Jen Xingqian arrived, he was the only one allowed to enter, just like the last few times. The others had to wait outside. Ha Tu Lei and the other 4 attendants did not have a good attitude towards the guards outside, and the guards outside also pretended not to see them. Everyone had their own masters to do their jobs, and it was none of their business if they were unhappy. This was an order from above, and we only needed to obey. When Jen Xingqian arrived at Silen's room, Silen and Hui Mao were rolling the egg around like a ball. Seeing Jen Xingqian, Silen looked up and smiled, "You're here." Hui Mao's claws left a few scratches on the egg and rubbed them together. Jen Xingqian nodded and pulled over a chair to sit down. "I received the news today, so I came to inform you so that you can prepare." "Prepare for what?" Silen stood up and faced Jen Xingqian. "Today might not be so peaceful." "Is that so?" Silen pushed the sea beast egg to a corner and ignored Hui Mao's protests. He looked at Jen Xingqian and said, "I know it won't be peaceful either." The moment he said this, Silen's hand flashed with silver light and slashed at Jen Xingqian like a bolt of lightning. Zzzt, the smiling Jen Xingqian was cut in half, but there wasn't a single drop of blood. The part that was cut open wasn't flesh, but metal. Being split in two after the sound of electricity. This person was a robot. Not to mention that the scanners in the building hadn't detected anything at all. Pastura and the others next door saw everything that happened on Silen's side very clearly. Something's wrong. Black Viper is on the move. The 3 of them jumped out of the window at the same time and fired at almost the same time. The 5 people who came with Jen Xingqian were shot in the forehead almost at the same time, but none of them bled. Moreover, they were able to move normally and evade the attacks even after being shot. All 5 of them were robots as well. At the same time, on Jen Xingqian's side, Jen Xingqian walked up to the badly deformed robot that had been turned into a pile of scrap metal. After taking a look at it, he put away his gun and walked out while stepping on the robot's head. His subordinates were already on the move. Who would have thought that Black Viper would send robots this time? The peaceful area was instantly engulfed in the flames of war the moment the anomaly began. Robots and mechanical animals swarmed out of the surrounding buildings. Not only could Black Viper's robots avoid detection by the scanners, they could also change their forms. They weren't robots that were completely controlled by humans, but more like trained agents and assassins. One of the robots transformed into a leopard after its arm was chopped off and leaped around to avoid gunfire. Their movements were agile and difficult to lock onto. Pastura leaped past the soldiers and landed on a protruding corner of the building in a couple of jumps, firing repeatedly with a backhand. 3 shots, 3 hits. The bullets pierced the chests of 3 robots and exploded, reducing them to scrap metal. "Where's Silen?" Pastura asked the guards who came out of the building where Silen was. "I didn't see him, he's gone." "Fuck. Find him." "Yes, sir." The guards were all on high alert when they saw Jen Xingqian. They let out a sigh of relief when they learned that this was the real Jen Xingqian and not a robot. They were a little confused. These robots could change their forms and make it difficult for people to notice them. The soldiers tensed up even more when Fu Qingqing found out that some of them had hidden among the soldiers and shot arrows at them. They didn't know if the person behind them was a robot or not, and they all suspected that it was an accident. These robots were very cunning. They constantly changed their forms from robots to different people and shuttled through this group of people at an extremely fast speed. They would even collect human blood and smear it on their bodies when they turned into people to confuse their vision. Their goal is to stall us. Let's not waste our time here. Our main goal is to find Silen. Pastura said to Fu Qingqing and Goryo. All right. Fu Qingqing and Goryo decisively withdrew from the fight and left the situation to the Imperial Guards and the Allied garrison. Zhen Xingqian also sent his men to find Silen. His identity didn't allow him to act as he pleased like Pastura and the others. Therefore, the only thing Zhen Xingqian could do right now was to settle the situation as best as he could. The Zhen family guards followed Zhen Xingqian closely and didn't give the robots a chance at all. Everyone else who got too close to Zhen Xingqian was treated as a suspect and executed. That was why the robots couldn't find a chance to cause trouble for Zhen Xingqian. Many of the surrounding buildings were damaged and riddled with holes, but most of the residents had evacuated by the time the garrison arrived. Therefore, there weren't many innocent casualties. The robots were fully equipped, and they didn't seem to be tired at all. Laser beams and cannons clashed with each other. The laser beams arced through the air like the feet of a crab before crashing down and shaking the ground. The war zone expanded, and the nearby residents and planetary government personnel hurriedly fled the area lest they get caught in the crossfire. The flames of war were burning fiercely here, and Celine was in hot pursuit. Chapter 255. After Silen killed the fake Zhen Xingqian, a person who looked exactly like the missing academician appeared not far away from Silen's window. No, it should be called a robot that had transformed into the missing academician. The robot ran away after seeing Silen kill the fake Zhen Xingqian, and Silen chased after it. Silen didn't use a hoverboard. Instead, he jumped from the rooftops of the residential buildings like the robot did. There were too many restrictions in the air, and it was too chaotic. The slightest carelessness would make him a target for everyone. No matter how agile a hoverboard was, it couldn't compare to Silen himself. Therefore, it was better for Silen to use his own legs for safety's sake. The robot was very fast. Unlike humans, who had a breathing limit, it could keep running at the same speed as long as it had enough energy. Moreover, it had great jumping ability. It was able to jump from one rooftop to another without a hitch. Every jump was flawless as if it had been made with precise calculations. The robot wasn't just fast, it was also running in tricky places. However, it didn't run towards crowded areas. Instead, it ran towards the outskirts of the city. Logically speaking, the robot could have easily fooled the army by turning into a human at will. But it didn't. Outside the city, there was a large desert. This desert was like a natural line of defense. Even if the sea beasts managed to attack inland, they would be severely hindered by this desert. The sea beasts couldn't live without water, and the desert environment was the sea beasts' least favorite environment. Therefore, there wasn't much human activity in the desert other than the observation stations that were set up at regular intervals. It was incredibly empty. This desert was the robot's target. There was a tracker installed on Silen, so Silen would receive a signal no matter where he went. Pastura and the others could easily track him down. But now, Pastura stared at the screen in his hand, but there was no signal at all. This meant that the tracker's signal had been blocked, and neither the satellite's global scan nor his WeChat ID were picking up any activity. Senior brother, the satellites and global scanning have been tampered with. They're temporarily paralyzed. Goryo reported to Pastura through the communicator. How long will it take to recover? I don't know. The technicians haven't made any progress yet. I've contacted Teacher Guan, and someone from the Royal Academy of Sciences will be remotely guiding the repair process, but I'm not sure when it'll be completed. Alright, hurry up and find it. It's over there in the desert. Alright. Pastura had just received news that Silen was seen running towards the desert, but he didn't know where exactly. He was too fast to catch up to. Right now, Pastura and the others were cursing Silen 1,000 times in their minds. The bastard really was a troublesome person. How many times had they told him not to leave their sight, and what did he get in the end? As soon as the incident happened, that guy ran away without a trace. Wasn't he afraid of being kidnapped too? Pastura didn't like Silen very much, but he still did his best to search for him. He was his junior brother after all, and he wouldn't be able to explain himself if something really happened to Silen. After Silen entered the desert, he gradually began to be attacked. There were a lot of robots hiding in the desert, robot scorpions, robot lizards, robot eagles and so on. Moreover, they could change their body color so that they would be in line with their surroundings. Not only could they change their color, but they could also turn invisible. That being said, being invisible was nothing to Silen. He could see the invisible robots. These robots used magnetic fields to distort the air around them to turn invisible, but Silen was very sensitive to magnetic fields. He could detect even the slightest change in the magnetic field if Silen thinks he's paying attention. Silen dodged the laser bullets fired by the robots as he ran. He blocked the ones he couldn't dodge with his longsword. There weren't many blades that could block laser bullets, and Silen's was one of them. Silen waved his hand and cut a charging mechanical lizard in half before jumping away with his right foot. The next moment, a corroded hole appeared where he was standing. The yellow sand let out sizzling sounds as it melted and turned black. Silen cut into the sand with his sword before he hit the ground and picked out the thing hidden underneath. It was a thin snake half a meter long, the same color as the sand. It spat venom at Silen's open mouth when Silen picked it up. Silen sidestepped the venom and cut the snake in half. The two halves of the snake's body revealed a mechanical form. It was a robot snake. A mechanical snake actually hid such a tyrannical venom. It looked like these robots had other tricks up their sleeves besides the weapons they carried with them. A gale blew past and covered the sky with sand, but the battle was still going on. The robots wouldn't stop attacking just because of the sand. Silen was dodging and killing, but he still had to chase after the figure in front of him. It was indeed difficult. After leaving the city, the figure suddenly stopped and turned to look at Silen. As it turned around, the appearance of the robot changed from the old academician to a beautiful woman. Her eyes were full of charm, and the V-shaped opening in front of her chest revealed her plump breasts. I didn't expect you to be able to chase me all the way here. Even the voice was full of charm. Silen stood not far away from it. He didn't even look behind him and cut a robot scorpion in half with his sword. Isn't this your goal? Why did you lead me here? You really don't know. The robot chuckled softly and slowly lowered its eyes. Actually, I wanted to get the other formulas of sea blue gold from you, but now. Master has changed his mind. After the robot finished speaking, it raised its eyes again. At the same time, the desert behind it started to move. Protrusions started to appear on the sand and they started to converge. When they rushed out of the sand, they slowly turned into human shapes. Almost all of them were people Silen had seen before. There were also a lot of familiar faces: Pastura, Fu Qingqing, Goryo, Guan Feng, Zhen Xingchen. Silen stared at the formation without much emotion on his face or in his eyes. He simply cut down the robots one by one when they charged at him. The robot understood human psychology very well. Actually, for people, even if they knew that the people in front of them weren't the real ones, they still had the same faces and many of their eyes were so similar. It was hard not to be traumatized when they personally cut them in half. However, Silen's hands were steady, and he swung his sword cleanly without any hesitation. It was as if he didn't know these faces at all. A machine was a machine, and it was different from a human being. Even if it had taken on a human face, even if its gaze was just a little bit similar, that was all it was. It could not be replaced. In Silen's eyes, there were two planes that could not be overlapped. There was no intersection. Old people, children, familiar faces. Silen's eyes didn't waver in the slightest when he cut them in half. TSK, I think you're more like a robot than we are, the original robot said. Alright, I think it's time for us to talk. The robot waved its hand, and the other robots stopped attacking Scylla and retreated. Scylla sheathed his sword and stood there just like before. All that was left were the hissing mechanical bodies on the ground. They don't know the sea blue gold formula at all, so it's useless even if you capture them. The Empire and RAS won't tell you anything, Scylla said. The robot knew that Scylla was talking about the two RAS academicians who were kidnapped, but it didn't answer the question directly. Instead, it asked, "You've been on this planet for more than 10 days now, and you've witnessed the war between humans and beasts. You must know the average combat power and military equipment of this planet." Scylla just looked at it and didn't say anything. He didn't know what this guy was trying to say. The robot continued, "The weapons of the people here are several levels lower than the weapons of the RAS, Weapons Research Institute. In the past, that minor noble was in charge alone, and he's always been on guard against the interference of other forces from outside the planet, even though the residents of this planet have always been living in the chaos of war. Of course, after a long period of brainwashing, the residents who don't know the level of development outside the planet have no complaints. The war has made them numb. However, after this time, their thinking will change." The robot stretched out its hand, and a projector in its palm projected a 5-meter-long and 3-meter-wide screen. The screen displayed the current battle in the city. It was a battle between 3 armies and robots. The flashing beams of light and particle cannons were extremely beautiful, and even the locals who were avoiding the battlefield could see the scene from afar. The screen that popped up from the robot's other hand was showing the battle between the locals and the sea beasts. Scylla had seen this before. Obviously, there was a gap. This was the gap. It's like a person living in a remote mountainous area. As long as they don't come into contact with the outside world, they won't feel that they're poor or backward. But when the outside world breaks the peace of this small mountainous area in the name of supporting the weak and supporting development, the people here will realize their poverty and experience the so-called inferiority complex. Perhaps at this time, the residents hiding in the distance will think, if they have such weapons and equipment, will they still be bullied by the sea beasts? "You talk too much," Scylla said. He didn't have any other thoughts because of what the robot said. Once a person started to feel emotional, they would be shaken. After being shaken once, there would be a second time. Then, the robot would bring up another topic to drive Scylla's emotions, and then slowly pry open Scylla's psychological defenses. The robot looked at Scylla's reaction and smiled helplessly. "You really are more like a primitive type robot." "Primitive type? Does that mean you're an evolved type?" Scylla said. The robot said proudly, "Yes, we're evolved type robots. We have the thoughts of a human, but the abilities of a robot." Following the robot's voice, the robot that was split in half by Scylla joined back together. Then, the cut gradually began to repair, and the repaired parts were not visible at all. However, the robots that were split in half from the head did not move. Scylla raised his hand and shot the head of a robot that had just recovered. Bang! The bullet that was shot into the robot's head caused a partial explosion, and the entire robot's head was blown to pieces. The robot that had lost its head stood there and reacted mechanically for a moment, and then there was no movement. In the beautiful robot's eyes, Scylla's action was a provocation. "I don't want to waste time." "You don't have any sincerity at all," Scylla said slowly. "Sincerity?" The originally angry robot quickly turned into a smile. "Are you willing to give me the recipe of the sea blue gold?" "I want to see those 2 people," Scylla said. It wasn't, "I want to see," but, "I want to see." From this sentence, one could tell that Scylla was quite domineering. "Sure." The beautiful robot reached out her hand, and the image on the light screen showed the old academician sealed in 2 transparent cabins. He seemed to have fainted. After seeing the image, Scylla shook his head. "I don't believe your image. It's too easy for you robots to tamper with this. I believe that the reason why the 3 armies can't find me now is because of you guys messing with the communication detection network. You're quite cunning. I also don't believe that you would tell me the recipe of the sea blue gold so easily. The beautiful robot retracted her hand and said. How much credibility does Black Viper have? Scylla countered. The beautiful robot stared at Scylla for 5 seconds and suddenly smiled. Okay, I'll take you there. As soon as her voice fell, the beautiful robot turned into an eagle and flew away. This time, Scylla used the hoverboard and followed the eagle. The eagle took Scylla to a sand dune in the desert, landed on the sand dune, and then let out an eagle cry. After the eagle cry, a part of the sand dune began to change. 1/3 of the sand dune turned into 2 large robots that were curled up in a protective posture around 2 transparent cabins. The 2 old academicians were inside the transparent cabins. Although they were unconscious, Scylla could see the pulse on their wrists. Judging from their pulse and blood pressure, they were just in a normal coma and weren't in any life-threatening danger. Now that you've seen it, show me your sincerity, said the eagle who landed on the sand dune. The eagle looked in a certain direction as soon as he finished speaking. The entire sand dune began to change at the same time. 2/3 of the sand dune had turned into various robots. They were the ones who had transformed this sand dune. In the direction the eagle was looking at, Pastura was pulling a one-man airship toward them. Goryo and Fu Qingqing were following closely behind Pastura. The eagle wasn't nervous or angry at the fact that Pastura and the other 2 had chased after him. Instead, he smiled. Your senior brothers and sisters are here, kid. What do you think will happen if they run into my subordinates? Chapter 256. The robot eagle's so-called subordinates were referring to the ones that had escaped from the sand dunes, and not the ones that Scylla had been fighting against earlier. In comparison, Scylla could sense that the former's defense was stronger than the latter's. Putting aside their attack power for now, just the camouflage of these robots into sand dunes was enough to tell who was superior. Actually, there was another way. This was what Whis had told him. The higher the level of a robot, the more complete and clear its machine language would be, and the less unorganized it would be. Of course, not everyone could use this method. Those who didn't understand machine language would never be able to see through it. The first robot lizard charged towards Pastura at the very front. It was so fast that the only thing left in its wake was a trail of sand. The robot lizard was already in front of Pastura when he jumped down from the airship, but Pastura didn't fire a shot. Pastura didn't fire his gun, however. He grabbed the mechanical lizard by its neck and crushed it into pieces by the time he landed on the ground. Pastura tossed the headless robot lizard onto the sand and looked at the robot eagle standing on top of a large robot. Then, he looked at the 2 people locked inside the transparent pods and walked towards them step by step. Fu Qingqing and Goryo walked behind Pastura in a triangular formation. Pastura's action was subconsciously the best answer to the robot eagle's question. Scylla smiled, it looks like the outcome is clear. The robot eagle's eyes focused and let out a high-pitched cry. The robots that had separated from the sand dunes and the mechanical animals that had rushed out of the sand after hearing the eagle's cry surrounded Scylla's group of 4. The robots guarding the 2 transparent pods were the only ones that didn't move. The robot eagle flapped its wings like a battle horn, signaling the start of the battle. These robots were much harder and more agile than the previous ones. They could even transform into other animals when they dodged in the air to better defend themselves. Scylla ignored the people inside the 2 transparent pods and swung his sword to attack the robots with Pastura and the others. These robots and mechanical beasts had a chance to start over as long as their heads weren't completely destroyed, so they had to make sure that their heads were completely destroyed with every blow. Moreover, there were too many of them, and it would be a huge burden if they couldn't finish them all off in one go. Humans couldn't compete with robots in endurance after all. Scylla swung his sword non-stop, but he didn't use his gun. He was able to find the perfect angle and strength for every swing of his sword in the shortest amount of time possible. It was a great way to conserve stamina, but it was just enough to shatter a robot's head. Scylla clearly sensed the robot's ability to learn while they were fighting. They weren't just fast, they were also very skillful. They were able to learn from Sillin and the others' fighting skills. Other than that, there was also their calculation ability. Goryo and the others had been using guns since a long time ago. At first, their hit rate was 100%. But as time went on, their hit rate started to drop. Some of the robots were already able to dodge bullets or use their shields to block part of the bullet's impact. As a result, the battle grew more and more intense as time went on. Guanfeng couldn't allow their hit rate to be lower than 99.9% during training, but Goryo, Fuqingqing, and Pastura's hit rate had fallen below this value. These robots were able to analyze the bullet's trajectory based on the previous shots and figure out the best way to dodge or block a bullet when it was aimed at them. Therefore, the robots were able to calculate where the bullet would land when Goryo and the others opened fire. Pastura and the others were aware of this drawback, but there was nothing they could do about it. The fastest bullet in the Purgatory Thunder Snake Type E round didn't have an explosive ability, but the robots could take advantage of the difference in speed to dodge the bullets. Just as Goryo was getting more and more exhausted, 3 mechanical lizards and 2 mechanical snakes charged at him. When Goryo fired at them, the 2 mechanical snakes and 2 mechanical lizards dodged. Only one of the mechanical lizards was shot in the head and lost its ability to fight. Goryo kept firing while dodging. Although the remaining 2 robot lizards and snakes were killed one after another, more robots joined the fray during this time. Goryo's experience was limited, and he wasn't as experienced as Pastura and Fuqingqing. At the very least, he wasn't as mentally prepared in a situation like this. After narrowly dodging the robot snake's venom and the robot lizard's laser bullets, a robot sand scorpion swung its hooked tail at Goryo. Bang! The robot sand scorpion's head exploded and its hooked tail slowed down. Goryo dodged the attack. Bang bang bang! After the robot sand scorpion, the robot animals surrounding Goryo were shot in the head one after another. Thanks! Goryo took the opportunity to thank Sillin. Sillin's gun didn't stop firing, and the explosions didn't stop at all. With Sillin as a factor, Pastura's trio's bullets arrived while the other robots and robot animals were focused on Sillin. A robot could dodge a bullet from one of Pastura's trio, but it couldn't dodge all 3 of them. At the very least, it wasn't possible right now. The 100 or so robots and robot animals had dwindled to a little over 20, and their numbers were decreasing with every passing second. The robot eagle looked into the distance and saw an army heading their way. They couldn't drag this out any longer, and judging from the current situation, these people weren't going to trade the formula. The robot eagle shook its wings and grabbed the transparent pods in its hands. Since you're not sincere, then, actually, the mechanical eagle wanted to see the expressions on the faces of Celine and the others when they personally witnessed the miserable state of the 2 old fellows locked inside the transparent pods being crushed into minced meat. But before it could finish speaking, it heard 2 cracking sounds. When it looked over, the 2 big robots' hands that were originally holding onto the transparent pods were already gone, leaving behind only the crackling sounds of electricity at the front ends of their broken wrists. The gray shadow flashed past and charged towards Sillin, knocking away a few mechanical animals that were blocking its way along the way. Then, it landed on Sillin's shoulder and calmly licked its claws. Pastura and the others didn't see what happened just now. Pastura had received a secret order to keep the formula a secret even if it meant sacrificing the 2 old academicians. Moreover, the culprit was to be captured and executed, so he was prepared to see a bloody scene. He didn't expect to see the 2 giant robots' arms missing their wrists when he turned around to look at them. Goryo and Fuqingqing were a little stunned as well. There were only 7 or 8 mechanical beasts left now, and Sillin took out all of them during this gap. The robot eagle stared intently at Huimao, who was licking its paws and wiping its face on Sillin's shoulder. It couldn't understand why the cat would suddenly appear without a sound. Logically speaking, no living creature should be able to escape its detection, but this cat had subverted everything it knew. Moreover, the 2 robot arms and the transparent pods had suddenly disappeared. The robot eagle couldn't figure out what was going on no matter how hard it thought about it. Is it also a mechanical type? No, the results of the spectral analysis are different from these evolved machines. But why do I feel like something's wrong? Bang! The protective light shield in front of the mechanical eagle blocked Silen's incoming bullets and pulled the mechanical eagle's attention back to the front. The eagle had to admit that Silen's gun was very threatening. It would have been a pile of scrap metal by now if it wasn't for the beam shield. The feathers under its wings turned into propellers, and the eagle took to the sky. The two robots slowly transformed into fighter jets and took to the sky. Boom! Boom! The two beams of light hit the two big robots, and the two big robots that were shot fell to the ground, causing a small storm to rise. The other beam that was shot at the eagle was dodged by the eagle, but the eagle was hit by 5 consecutive bullets from Silen, who was flying over on a hoverboard. The bullets didn't hit the eagle directly, but hit the protective light shield around the eagle instead. However, the vibrations caused by the shield lowered the eagle's agility, and Pastura fired a lightning net at it. The electric net wrapped the whole eagle inside, and the protective light shield gradually faded under the use of the electric net. The eagle let out a loud cry, and Silen and Pastura swiftly retreated. As expected, the robot eagle exploded the next moment, and the shockwave from the explosion pushed Silen far away. Fortunately, Silen's body was strong, or he would have broken his bones and tendons. Silen turned around to look at Pastura. Fine, the guy has protective gear. There's no need to worry at all. Silen landed on the ground, swaying unsteadily. Use this thing less in the future. It's not good, Pastura said. To Pastura, hoverboards were something for kids to play with. They could only be used to look cool, and their extremely low stability made them useless on the battlefield. That was why he didn't recommend Silen to use them all the time. Silen nodded in agreement, but he had a different thought in his mind. He was used to hoverboards, and the one he was riding on was something he'd modified himself. Although it looked like a normal flying toy to others, Silen still liked it a lot. It was convenient and had a lot of freedom. Huimao spat out the thing in his mouth. Huimao's mouth suddenly grew very big when he spat it out, but it only lasted for a very short time. The thing quickly returned to its original size after he spat it out. Pastura and the others only saw a gray blur before the two hands holding the translucent pods popped out. There were even a few pieces of undigested sea beast meat stuck to them. Goryo and Fu Qingqing's faces contorted when they saw it. Pastura still had a stern expression on his face, but the corner of his eyes couldn't help but twitch a little when he saw it. Disgusting. The two old academicians were still unconscious inside the pods. Pastura opened the pods and checked their condition. They're not in any danger. They'll be fine after an injection. Pastura started inspecting the surroundings after he said that. The machines that kept emitting static noises were strewn all over the ground. Right now, all Pastura wanted to do was ask Guanfeng for permission to use the Purgatory Thunder Snake K again. Every time he saw the Purgatory Thunder Snake K, he felt that the Purgatory Thunder Snake E was pretty slow. After the battle against the robots, he realized that the Purgatory Thunder Snake E couldn't keep up. Moreover, Guanfeng was starting to develop the Purgatory Thunder Snake S. They weren't going to use the Purgatory Thunder Snake E when the time came. It didn't take long for Zhen Xingqian to arrive with his men. He was the one who ordered the particle beams to shoot down the two giant robots. Zhen Xingqian let out a sigh of relief when he saw that Silen was unharmed. He didn't really care about the two old academicians' safety. Pastura's communicator suddenly rang while he was observing the situation on the ground. The fact that his communicator was ringing meant that the network had more or less recovered. Captain, something's happened here. Fu Qingqing and Goryo also received messages while Pastura was answering the call. Both of them reported the same thing, something had happened at Stappen's place. There was no doubt that Silen was the focal point of this incident, but a lot of people had forgotten about Stappen. Even if Stappen was in the same building as the people from the RAS, something had still gone wrong when both the Imperial United Guard and the Royal Guard were watching over him. To think that the people under their protection would still be threatened by an outsider. one had to admire the robot's capabilities. When they were discovered inside the building, the academicians and scholars of the RAS and Stappen in the next room had passed out and were in a deep coma. Tests revealed that they had been hypnotized, and a lot of information had been leaked. Although it couldn't be said to be extremely important, the information they possessed couldn't be underestimated. As for Stappen, Cylon could understand why the robots were looking for him. It was true that Cylon was the only one present who knew about the latest Sea Blue Gold formula, but Stappen was the one who had discovered the formula in the first place. Since they couldn't get the formula from Cylon, they might as well start with Stappen. With Black Viper's intelligence, it was only natural that they would be able to analyze a couple of new Sea Blue Gold formulas based on Stappen's research methods. As for the best formula, the one that came from the Sea King egg, he didn't know if it would work. Of course, one thing was for sure, the people of the RAS would be very busy after today. They would use every second they had to research Sea Blue Gold and prevent themselves from falling behind Black Viper. It would be a huge embarrassment if the RAS's research on Sea Blue Gold fell behind Black Viper's when the time came. At the same time, in space outside the planet, a robot that looked similar to a mechanical eagle revealed itself from stealth at a certain distance away from the military starship stationed outside the planet. A spaceplane revealed itself in front of it, and before the military starships could react, the mechanical eagle flew into the spaceplane. Then, the spaceplane entered stealth mode again and left the area at top speed. Cylon didn't need to worry about the spaceplane outside the planet. That was something the military and the higher-ups of both sides would discuss in depth. After being asked a few standard questions, Cylon was arranged to enter a building. Of course, it wasn't the original building. The original building had been reduced to rubble during the battle between the military and the robots. His return date had been pushed back by 2 days. Cylon lay on his bed and closed his eyes to rest. Fighting against the robots was too mentally exhausting, and he had to calculate and counter-calculate every second of the day. Now that he had finally relaxed, he unsurprisingly felt a lot of fatigue. After Huimao walked around the room, he opened his mouth and spat out an egg. This was the sea monster egg that he used as a toy to relieve his boredom. At that time, in order to cooperate with Cylon's actions, he couldn't bear to put the egg down, so he swallowed it directly. Huimao originally thought that it would be fine if the egg was digested, but he didn't expect that the egg would still be in good condition. The outer layer of attachment had been digested, and the eggshell had become a lot smoother, but it was still intact. It's really hard to digest. Huimao pushed the egg with his claws. Without the attachment, the egg rolled on the ground. After playing with the egg for a while, Huimao jumped onto Cylon's shoulder and closed his eyes as if he was taking a nap. But in fact, Huimao and Cylon were communicating. The people monitoring them couldn't detect the silent interaction between the man and the cat at all. The moment these robots appeared, Cylon felt a sense of familiarity. Many of these robots had independent thoughts, especially the one leading them. Aside from their metal bodies, their thoughts were closer to that of a human's. They had their own expressions and emotions, and they knew anger. Their rich emotions made Cylon think that he was reminded of Sigma, who lived in a distant galaxy. Huimao's guess was proven right. Every type of machine could be deduced based on their mechanical language. If you were to use the human evolutionary tree as a comparison, then even if the robots and mechanical beasts didn't belong to the same branch, they all originated from the same starting point. It was the same starting point as Sigma. In other words, Sigma's master was indeed in this star system. Many years had passed, and Sigma's master was long gone. However, there was still his legacy. But was the descendant of Sigma's master really in Black Viper? Back in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, Cylon hadn't discovered anything about Sigma's master. Cylon even went through some historical records, but he couldn't find anything. At one point, Cylon even suspected that this galaxy was the one Sigma spoke of. Now, it seemed that he was right. The mechanical eagle's final cry was to confirm whether the operation against Stappen on the other side was going smoothly or not. After receiving confirmation that everything was going well, the mechanical eagle decisively self-destructed. Are we really going to stand against Sigma's master, Silen? Hui Mao asked. He didn't like the robots and mechanical beasts in the slightest. It was the complete opposite of how he felt when he first saw Sigma. Sigma would make him want to get close to them, but these robots made him seriously sick to his stomach. I don't know yet, but I'm sure we'll find out in the future, Silen said. Hui Mao let out a long sigh. What if he couldn't stop himself from killing the descendant of Sigma's master if we really did end up as enemies? Silen patted Hui Mao's shoulder and said, All right, don't think too much. We don't know anything yet, so don't worry yourself. The next 2 days were relatively quiet, so Silen didn't have to worry too much. Right now, the busiest people in the RAS were the ones with the most work. The incident this time had given the RAS a wake-up call, and the research of both information technology and new materials was of the utmost urgency. If they couldn't produce results soon, the robots would slip away right under their noses again. The top brass of the RAS had called for an emergency meeting after this incident, but Silen didn't know the specifics of the meeting. He didn't care to know either. Right now, Silen was going back with 3 armies. Why 3 armies? Because other than the Imperial Guards and Imperial Guards, Zhen Xingqian and the Zhen family were also going with him. A lot of people were starting to think about why the Zhen family wouldn't leave their side. Guan Feng hadn't contacted Silen during this time. It was very strange. In the past, Guan Feng would have contacted Silen at least once. This time, however, Silen couldn't reach him even if he wanted to. Silen finally learned the reason why he couldn't contact Guan Feng all this time after he arrived at AF1. Zhen Xingqian and his men were restricted to a certain extent in AF1, so he only brought a few people with him. The rest of them waited at the designated location. The first thing Silen did after he returned to AF1 was to find Guan Feng. Silen felt an oppressive chill before he even entered the house. He shot a glance at Zhen Xingqian, who was pretending to know nothing, and finally opened the door to the courtyard. The moment he stepped inside, the ring on Silen's finger started vibrating. It was numb and painful as if it had been electrocuted, but it didn't feel like it was in danger. In fact, it felt like it couldn't wait any longer. This was the first time the ring with the curly leaf pattern had reacted like this since he got it for so many years. The door to Guan Feng's residence was kicked open from the inside with a bang. The entire electronic door was sent flying. Zhen Xingqian and a couple of Zhen family members who were standing behind Silen shuddered and backed away when they heard the door being kicked open. Zhen Liao, this is my territory. How dare you kick open my door in my territory? Guan Feng's roar came from inside the residence. Guan Feng had always been a gentleman in front of outsiders. He always wore a smile on his face, but the roar had shattered his gentlemanly image to smithereens. After the door was kicked open, a white-haired figure appeared. His figure was tall and straight, and he didn't look crooked or decrepit at all. When Silen saw the person standing at the door, he felt like he was seeing Genya again. However, this person's aura was too strong. The sharpness of his aura, which had been accumulated over the years, was so strong that no one dared to look him in the eye. Genya's aura was as gentle as a warm breeze on a sunny day. Their faces were similar, but their styles were completely different. Zhen Liao was sitting on the sofa in Guan Feng's living room, sipping tea and exchanging insults with Guan Feng. Suddenly, his finger trembled. How many years had it been since he felt something like this? When they were young, their father had given them 3 rings and put them on. When they put on the rings and the rings turned into a circle of curly leaf patterns on their fingers, he had felt something like this. There was a time when Zhen Liao thought that he would never feel something like this again. After their sister passed away for some reason, Zhen Liao would often stare blankly at the curly leaf patterns on his fingers. At the time, Zhen Liao had already abdicated his position, and he had experienced a sorrow he had never experienced before. Every time the gears of time moved, it was like the teeth of the gears were pressing into his heart. Every time he thought about it, he could always see the clear imprint of the gears. It was an unforgettable memory of the passage of time. Therefore, when this feeling appeared on his finger again, Zhen Liao had the urge to cry. However, the person standing not far away from him didn't look like the person he remembered. Although Zhen Liao had investigated Silen and analyzed Silen's genotype, this contradictory feeling was still very uncomfortable. Is he gone? It's been so many years, and the ring has changed owners. Zhen Liao strode towards Silen while suppressing his uneven breathing. After glancing at the curly leaf pattern on Silen's finger, he grabbed Silen by the shoulder and dragged him into the house. Zhen Xingqian and the others were about to follow him in, but Zhen Liao's shout jolted them back to their senses. Guan Feng watched as Zhen Liao dragged his student into a room and slammed the door shut with a bang. He opened his mouth, cursed under his breath, and turned his attention to Zhen Xingqian and the others who were standing in the yard. They started talking about the compensation for his house and the mental damage he had suffered. Silen didn't fight back even though he was dragged into the room by the collar. He thought that the man in front of him was way too different from Zhenya, and that Zhenya wouldn't have grabbed someone like this back in the day. It was only after Zhen Liao dragged Silen into the room that he realized that the room was Guan Feng's spare kitchen. Zhen Liao found the pots and pans in the room an eyesore, so he grabbed them all, squeezed them into a ball, opened the window and tossed them out. After he was done, Zhen Liao opened a barrier and turned the room into a small cubicle that couldn't be seen or heard from the outside. You, Zhen Liao was so excited that he couldn't utter a "you" for a very long time. In the end, he grabbed Silen's collar and shook it a little. Speak. Silen. Come on, what do you want me to say? I don't know anything about the Zhen family. After a moment of thought, Silen said, Ahem, my master left this ring to me after he passed away. Your master is Zhenya? Zhen Liao's voice was trembling and a little hoarse. He looked like he was trying to suppress something. Silen nodded. Although he was mentally prepared, Zhen Liao still couldn't stop the tears from welling up in his eyes when he heard that Zhenya had passed away. He took a few deep breaths to hold back his tears and asked, did he leave anything behind? Yes, my master hoped that he could return to his roots. Silen took out the wooden coffin with a wave of his hand. The coffin was still tightly sealed, but Zhen Liao could sense that the person inside was Zhenya. He could sense that the person inside the coffin made of Fuji tree shared the same bloodline as him. Zhen Liao's expression changed abruptly when he put his finger on the coffin. He swiftly put away the coffin, grabbed a sad Silen and kicked the door open. Guan Feng and Zhen Xingqian were in the middle of discussing compensation when they saw Zhen Liao run like the wind and drive away in the flying car Zhen Xingqian had come in. He didn't even leave Zhen Xingqian behind. The people in the courtyard were left standing there in a daze. Chapter 257. Silen knew that Zhen Liao was very agitated. He didn't loosen his grip on Silen's collar even after he had jumped onto the flying car. Moreover, his legs had been trembling ever since he sat down. It was obvious that he was in a hurry and didn't want to deal with the people chasing after him. In the affiliated schools, no matter whose flying car it was, except for the flying cars driven by the campus patrol team, which were allowed to exceed the speed limit under certain special circumstances, other people were not allowed to do so. However, not only did Zhen Liao increase his flying car's speed to its maximum, he even took a few shortcuts to minimize the distance between 2 points. Zhen Liao turned a deaf ear to the campus patrol team and a bunch of Euroists that were following behind him. Perhaps it was because the school patrol team and the enforcement robots were too annoying, but Zhen Liao directly contacted the higher-ups of the affiliated schools. He didn't care what the other side of the call would say. He cut off the call right away and ignored the angry faces of the people on the other end of the line. Half a minute later, the campus patrol team and the law enforcement robot were retrieved. Therefore, when the group of people from the affiliated schools saw the flying car flying past them without any regard for order, they all had the same thought: why aren't there any pursuers? Many people in the affiliated schools had raced before and were often hauled away by the school patrol team and the enforcement robots for punishment. But this flying car was too fucking arrogant. Some of the students even sent a video of the incident to the affiliated school's main surveillance center to report it, but all of them shut up when they saw the flying car. When Zhen Liao drove the flying car to the port, a large spaceplane with the Zhen family's insignia was already waiting for him. The door opened, and Zhen Liao drove the flying car inside. The spaceplane quickly took off. Zhen Liao didn't loosen his grip on Silen's collar even after he got off the flying car and walked into his private lounge. It was as if Silen would run away the moment he let go. He didn't say anything or explain himself. His violent aura made it clear to everyone who saw Zhen Liao that the former King Fuji was in an irritable and impatient mood. No one was stupid enough to walk up to him and get scolded. The spaceplane flew directly to the territory of the Zhen family in the imperial capital. There was a planet there where King Fuji's manor was located. The people living on that planet were all important figures of the Zhen family, such as Zhen Liao, Zhen Xingqian, and Zhen Xingming. The planet where King Fuji's residence was located was called Planet Fuji. From space, the entire planet appeared green, like a forest, and also like a lake. It looked full of life. The spaceplane landed in a corner of the palace. Zhen Liao couldn't wait to drag Silen back to a courtyard inside the palace. The courtyard was Zhen Liao's residence after he retired. It wasn't far from the current King Fuji's residence, and it was the most heavily guarded place. Although the guards were curious about Silen's identity, they kept their expressions serious and focused when they saw Zhen Liao dragging Silen into the courtyard. Although the guards were curious about Silen's identity, they didn't bother to look to the side. There was a thick tree inside Zhen Liao's courtyard. It was a tree that Silen was very familiar with. He had come into contact with it since he was a child. It was called Fuji, the upper tree. It was similar to the one in Zhenya's courtyard, but this one was much thicker and more lush. It was a far cry from the one Zhen Liao had seen before. Zhen Liao dismissed all the servants and left the courtyard to his trusted aides. He finally let go of Silen, and Silen rubbed his neck. He didn't even need to look to know that there was a mark on his neck. The old man might be old, but he was strong enough to wring a person like a chick. Zhen Liao pressed a switch on the wall, and a green pool appeared on the ground. Zhen Liao took out the coffin and carefully placed it into the pool. As soon as the coffin came into contact with the water in the pool, a large amount of air bubbles appeared around the originally tightly sealed coffin. The lid of the coffin loosened at the same time. Silen stared at the pond without blinking. She seemed to have sensed what was going to happen next, and her emotions rippled in a rare way. The gray cat carefully poked its head out from Silen's shoulder. The old man's series of excited actions earlier had left the gray cat unsure of how to react, so it could only grab Silen tightly and allow itself to be brought to this place. Since the old man didn't say anything and didn't toss it out, and the guards outside didn't react, the gray cat naturally followed them to this place. Of course, Hui Mao was aware of the changes in Silen's heart rate, so it was curious as to what the old man was going to do. Hui Mao already knew that there was a person lying inside the coffin. Was the old man going to perform an autopsy? Plop, the lid of the coffin finally broke free from the bottom and floated up. The boiling water pushed the lid to the side, revealing the person lying inside. The person soaking in the pool looked exactly the same as he remembered. He looked very peaceful, just like when Silen had placed him in the coffin. The only difference was that Silen could sense Jenya's life force. No wonder Zhenya had asked Silen to bury him like this. No wonder, Zhen Liao jumped into the pool with trembling hands, took out a tube and injected it into Zhenya's body. Zhenya's life force quickly returned to normal after the injection, and his heartbeat grew stronger and stronger. Zhenya hadn't died yet. It was just that Zhenya had caused his metabolism to almost completely stop in the past, putting him in a state of suspended animation. However, under the stimulation of this plant hormone extracted from the Fuji tree, his stagnant metabolism would restart. As long as he was taken care of properly, his bodily functions would gradually recover. Zhen Liao tossed the empty tube to the side and made a sound that sounded like he was crying and laughing at the same time. Zhen Liao's back was facing Silen, so Silen couldn't see his expression. However, he could sense his emotions from the rhythm of his breathing. Both of them were in the same mood. Genya floated up from the pool, and Zhen Liao carefully placed him into a recovery pod. The pod would automatically provide the optimal ratio of air and nutrients according to the patient's physical condition and physiological needs. Silin and Zhen Liao watched quietly from the side. Neither of them made a sound, and the only sound in the room was the sound of the healing pods and the sound of Wei scratching itself with its head tilted to one side. An hour later, the indicator light of the recovery pod turned from red to green. It was also at this time that Genya opened his eyes. The lid of the recovery pod opened, and Genya's eyes darted around to see the two people in front of him. At first, he was a little dazed, as if he couldn't see them clearly. However, his eyes gradually adapted to the light and regained their ability to see. Silin, his voice carried the hoarseness of someone who had just recovered from a long illness, but it was as amiable as before. Time seemed to have returned to the courtyard filled with memories. He was lying on the wooden rocking chair under the Fuji tree, making the chair creak as it swayed. In the fine light that sprinkled through the gaps between the leaves, he slowly muttered. Silin, help master get a bottle of alcohol, something strong. Silin, help master massage his back. He's getting old, and it's easy for his back to hurt after lying down for too long. Silin, help master. Silin was so touched that he wanted to cry when he heard that voice again after so long. He covered his burning eyes with his hands, but he couldn't help but look through the gaps between his fingers at the person lying in the recovery pod. It's so good to be alive. Hui Mao blinked and looked at the person lying in the pod. Then, he looked at the old man with a dark expression and bulging veins on his forehead. He wagged his tail and chuckled inwardly. The old man had been ignored. Zhen Liao was furious. Hadn't he rushed back to the Zhen family from the affiliated school in order to revive Genya as soon as possible? The bastard was still as heartless as he was when he was young. Zhen Liao wanted to bang his head against the wall the moment he opened his mouth. He was expecting Genya to call him brother in excitement, but he didn't expect Genya to call him Silin instead. In that moment, Zhen Liao felt like he had been reduced to the background of a black and white sketch. Genya's gaze finally landed on Zhen Liao, whose face was contorted in anger. He was silent for half a minute before he finally called out, "Big brother," in a questioning tone. Genya was still young when he left, and Zhen Liao was still in the prime of his youth. Who would have thought that the next time they met, they would both be old men? But blood was a strange thing. Even though they were both old and far from their youthful selves, it was still easy to feel the bond of blood at first glance. Genya smiled before Zhen Liao could answer. He was now sure that the person standing in front of him was his own older brother, Zhen Liao, who had been raised as the heir. So many years had passed, and Zhen Liao hadn't succeeded to the throne yet. Now that they met again, Zhen Liao had already stepped down. Although Silin really wanted to chat with Genya, judging from the current situation, it was better for him to back out. Some secrets were brought up again, and it wasn't convenient for Silin to listen to them. Silin, I'll come find you later, Genya said to Silin. All right. Silin carried Hui Mao out the door. The guard at the door glanced at Silin and was about to question him when Zhen Liao's voice came from inside the house. Take him to rest. An old servant walked over with a wide smile on his face. He led Silin to another room in the courtyard to rest. Silin, I didn't expect your master to be a member of the Zhen family. He's royalty, and the younger brother of the old King Fuji. Hee, we won't have to worry about money in the future. Silin. Silin was treated very well in this place. The old servant who served Zhen Liao treated Silin like he was his own grandson. Although he was an old servant, he had served Zhen Liao for a very long time, and his status in the Zhen family was very special. Sometimes, the side branches of the Zhen family had to use honorifics when they saw the old servant. Even Zhen Xingming didn't dare to order the old servant around. It was obvious how rare it was for the old servant to treat Silin like this. It was already the next day when Silin saw Genya again. Genya talked about the ownership of the ring. Although the ring could only be owned by someone of noble status and the Zhen family's bloodline, it was still a matter for the older generation. Zhen Liao didn't object to Zhenya's decision to leave the ring to Silan. Without Silan, today's reunion wouldn't have happened, so Zhen Liao was very grateful to Silan. After Zhenya left, he wandered the world for a very long time. He never married, and he didn't have any descendants even now. Although technology could be used to create a descendant, it wasn't something that could be produced in a short period of time. The fact that Zhenya left the ring that symbolized his extraordinary status in the Zhen family to Silan instead of his own descendant meant that Silan's special status was officially recognized. This meant that Silan had a status that was even more special than the old servant in the Zhen family. Apart from the fact that he didn't have the right to inherit the throne, he was treated the same as Zhen Xingming and the other princes, if not better. After all, Silan had two elders who were even older than him standing behind him. Zhenya used to own a large manor, but he didn't live there for long before an accident happened. Now that he was standing in this manor again, he felt a deep sense of nostalgia. From this day onwards, Zhenya and Silan would live in this manor. If Zhenya passed away in the future, everything here would be inherited by Silan. Zhenya left more than half of his subordinates and belongings to Silan. The rest of the things that were too close to the Zhen family were given to Zhen Liao. After being away for so long, Zhenya was no longer competitive. He had spent the best years of his life wandering the world, and he was content to return to the place where he started before he truly passed away. There was a 1,000-year-old Fuji tree in the manor that covered half of the yard. It was like an enlarged version of the courtyard in his memory. Zhenya once said that Fuji trees were sentient. They were more like a species that existed between an animal and a plant. Although Fuji trees didn't move around as often as the plants that Silan had seen before, they basically wouldn't move away after taking root in one place. They stood there for hundreds of thousands of years. In the entire empire, Fuji trees would only grow luxuriantly where the Zhen family lived. Even if they were transplanted to other places, even if they were provided with superior conditions, they would never grow as well as the Zhen family's Fuji trees. There were many 1,000-year-old Fuji trees similar to the one in the courtyard on the planet where Prince Fuji's manor was located. They were luxuriant with leaves, and it was hard to tell that they had lived for hundreds of thousands of years. However, they had indeed lived through the vicissitudes of life. They had witnessed the Zhen family's development over the past 1,000 years, the passing of generations, the retirement of the older generation, and the rise of the new. Silan supported Zhenya and walked in front of the Fuji tree. Its thick trunk and sturdy roots showed just how long it had been alive. Zhenya stared at the courtyard and the ancient tree in his memory for a long time. They had caused hundreds of years of time and space to condense here. Outside the courtyard, there were interwoven roads and pavilions that rose continuously. There were also flying cars and aircrafts in the sky. It was a dazzling sight. Zhenya had only just recovered from a long illness, so he returned to his room to rest after a short walk in the courtyard, leaving Silan to walk the cat in the courtyard. Hui Mao was very excited. He jumped from branch to branch like a pine tree, sometimes swaying on a branch and rushing to the top of the tree to enjoy himself. Silan! Silan! Hui Mao ran over excitedly and jumped onto Silan's shoulder. Does that mean we're rich now? Of course, Hui Mao knew that Zhenya had left a lot of his assets to Silan. Hui Mao used the word "we," which was a very subtle word. It seemed like this guy had always tied himself to Silan. If Silan was rich, it was rich too, because whatever it wanted, Silan would buy. Hui Mao started thinking about what it wanted to buy. Fish biscuits and all-fish combo weren't what Hui Mao wanted the most right now. What Hui Mao wanted the most was a fish pond. Hui Mao's wish came true the next day. It mentioned it to Yunyi during dinner that night. So, the next day, when it jumped out of the window and was about to stretch, it found a fish pond. It was a 200-square-meter fish pond that Zhenya had ordered to be built overnight. With the help of the digging robots, the pond was completed in one night. Currently, there were some fish swimming leisurely in the pond. Hui Mao circled around the pond, patrolling his territory. After some thought, Hui Mao rolled the egg that he hadn't eaten all this time over, grabbed it, and pushed it directly into the pond. This egg needs to hatch, doesn't it? Will the egg hatch if we just push it in like that? Yuan Xingming asked from not far away. After learning that Silan had become a member of the Zhen family, Zhen Xingming decisively skipped class and went home under the pretense of visiting his elders. Really? Hui Mao flicked his ears when he heard Zhen Xingming's words. Then, he jumped back into the pond unwillingly and tossed the egg back up. Zhen Xingming was very worried that the egg would break when he saw Hui Mao tossing it around like a ball. Oh right, I heard that your teacher is pretty angry, Silan. Zhen Xingming turned to Silan. Many people knew that Guan Feng had a bad temper. He might look friendly normally, but it was very difficult to calm down once he was angry. Many people were guessing how Guan Feng would deal with Silan after what had happened to Silan. After all, it was a publicly known secret that Guan Feng and the Zhen family didn't get along. This was why none of Guan Feng's students were related to the Zhen family. However, Silan was an exception this time. Right now, Guan Feng's students were spread all over the major forces. The Zhen family was the only exception in the past, but that exception was gone now. Countless people were waiting to see Silan make a fool out of himself. Silan wasn't worried about this. Guan Feng wasn't stupid, and there were many things he knew about Silan and the Zhen family a long time ago. However, the fact that Guan Feng hadn't expressed his opinion or told Silan to cut ties with the Zhen family meant that Guan Feng didn't mind it at all. He wasn't like everyone else. The fact that Zhen Liao was allowed into his house meant that Guan Feng wasn't completely cut off from the Zhen family. Zhenya walked over slowly and smiled when he heard Zhen Xingming and Silan's conversation. Guan Feng, that guy's still as awkward as ever. It's been so many years, but he still can't let it go. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.